First image.
Free for the past couple of days, leading up to today, which is the release of the second book, Aggravated Flesh by Jesse Collins, another flash fiction novelization. Link to both books in the description down below. I strongly suggest you check them out. I'm not sure if the first book is still available for the giveaway, but if it is, hey, you have a little bit of time left to grab it before it goes back to full price. The second book you can also grab if you've already got the first one. It should be available now on Kindle and paperback. And now, on to tonight's story. So, right. I found myself at a red light. The weather was nice. I had mood. Something. Traffic lantern sways in the breeze. The red glow beaming through the surrounding landscape. My palms start to sweat and I readjust my grip on the wheel to the gas station. An old mom and pop with a single wheel of pups standing under a flickering light. When I look through the window, there doesn't seem to be anyone working behind the counter. Maybe they're taking out cash. To my right, there seems to be a bar that closed up for the night. The parking lot's empty, the neon sign shut off. But the name is too bad.
So sweet.
Head remains red, but not red. My knuckles nervously and turn on the radio. Soothing music. I tune the dial to find a station, watching moving blue on the dash as I navigate the static. Holes. Wobbles back and forth, but nothing can really come through. Must be too far from the local stations. Something about the aggravated static makes me uneasy, and I feel myself starting to sweat. Red light again. Distracted. The street, there's a fox walking in the grass. One that's pulling a tiny leash behind it. It stops.
Is it lagging?
Then looks at me momentarily, tilting its head in interest. About it makes me uncomfortable. The condensation of sweat on my brow. My eyes feeling the glimmer of a migraine behind it. When I look down, I see the relief to the unending static on the radio. Sitting in the cup holder is a cassette tape. Too good to be true. I grab the tape and look at it. It's an old tape. One that looks like it's seen much use. Celine Dion's Falling Into You album. Perfect. Around the intersection and see it's still empty.
Is that just this video? What the hell's going on?
At last, some kind of reassurance for this damn red light. I check both ways again and lean over.
Oh, I hope it's just this video.
The rectangular plastic of the cassette is satisfying. The crisp drag of it entering the deck is satisfying. Satisfying. Tape plays over the speakers. I feel myself relax. It's so good. It's better now. I'm better now. I sink into my seat as the piano intro starts, and I feel like I can breathe again. The music calms the buzzing in my head, and my nerves start to calm. Now, if only the light would change, and I could get on with my peaceful drive. Straight, the fox continues to look at me. I pay it no mind. I place my hands back on the steering wheel. It's nice out tonight. Through the haze of the windshield, I look up at the red light. Why it refuses to change, but I'm patient.
Jeez.
Everything.
Huh.
Fine. I glance at all lanes of the intersection, thinking maybe a car is going to come. See it. That's why it's taking so long. Please,
You reinforcing with the one? Yes.
Please. I was nervously at the gas station when I left, expecting it to be empty, and it's not. And was standing behind the register. It's like a man in a metal suit, like nights on, horribly modified with a tail made of wires and computer parts. No, I whisper to myself looking on. I've been doing so good, there's no way it's gotten away from me. It's not really there. I know it's not, so I look to the right and make sure. The parking lot to the closed bar is no longer empty. Something stands tall amongst the rows of painted lines. A large horse in a suit. Human hands stapled where the front hooves should be. No, I say again, getting a rush of bile in my throat. I swallow and keep it down, along with the murmur of the migraine that begins to return. Really? It's fine. Everything's fine. It's been fine for a while. Really. The familiar cold sweat returns, hands clammy on the wheel. The song rises over the speakers of the playing tape, and I plead for it to comfort me, as I look desperately at the red light. Don't change. Don't just change. I don't want to do this. I can't do this. Above, the red light mocks me. Across the street, the fox mocks me. It looks at me in judgment, its face twisting like it's trying to die. Something behind it stirs in the trees, and I can
Should probably upgrade my beast team first, right? Because I have 233s.
And a writhing mass of slick tentacle. Please, please, please! I beat my hands on the steering wheel, feeling myself crumble under the weight of it all. Above, the light is red. Behind me, I see the headlights of another car. I watch them in the rearview mirror, and I feel the welling of tears in my eyes. The hair on my neck stands straight. My armpits are moist. The stream of sweat drizzles down my temple. I want to feel for my phone, but I don't think I have it. I think I've had it for a while. The car slows for the red light and pulls in the lane next to me. The car stops. The groan of another engine idling, threatening my music. I want to look at them. So I don't. I don't care who it is. I try to focus on the music. Hard to hear. I'm going to run the red light. I mash the pedal to the floor, but the car doesn't move. I try again and again, each time harder than the last. I look at the fuel gauge and see I have no gas. Every light on the dash is on now. The collective of symbols telling me I'm not going anywhere soon. Doing good, you've been. Across the street, the fox is vomiting what looks like A man. In fur makes way for a head and naked body. A slimy face with eyes that open in time to look at me. Please, I say again, looking away from the oral bird to the car next to me. The window rolls down, revealing two men in suits and close-cropped hair. They watch me wordlessly, eyes shielded behind sunglasses and a film of cigarette smoke that billows out. They say nothing, only watch, as the sound of my music fades away to nothing. No. I try to turn the volume down, but the radio explodes with noise. The sounds of 100 screams fill my ears so loud it hurts. I scream against the noise, but it doesn't stop. I hit the stop button, try to eject the tape, anything. The screams become too much. Then I find myself tearing off my seatbelt, fleeing the car. Outside of the car, it's silent again. The fog is rolling in, one that wafts over the intersection until it's consumed by it. To the gas station for help. See the inside of it painted red. By the station, a man in a hard hat is getting mutilated, watching me with a smile as a metal alligator human tears through his guts with gloves made of knives. The alloy abomination snarls and stomps the man on the ground, crushing both his skull and the hard hat with a large steel boot. Outside, a garbage truck rumbles to life at the gas pump. Peace. Crisp night air, I hear the neigh of the horseman. He's closer now, standing on the side of the road. He downs what looks like a glass of whiskey before squeezing it in his hand so hard it shatters. His natural hand runs the thumb over its fingers, shards of glass serrating the pale digits. Across the street, the fox completes its purge. The naked man rises from the fetal position on the grass, standing tall and awkward with a face and eyes that look like mine. Behind him, the deer monstrosity emerges from the woods. A portrait of animal gore of all kinds shifting under 100 reaching feet.
Already on the 4th day? Oh my god.
To get back into the car, but when I turn around, my car is gone. The men in sunglasses watch without emotion, their eyes bleeding from behind the sunglasses. After staring at me for a long moment, they turn their heads in unison to face the intersection.
Oh my god, thank god
the
it's
trunk of their car
like
pops.
A collection thing.
And a clown climbs out with a wooden bat in his hands. He points past me with the club, in the same direction the men in sunglasses are looking. Please help me.
I just need the 3, right?
Cover my eyes as the fog retreats. In the intersection, there's no red light. The pavement has crumbled in on itself, forming a crater where the street used to be. I want to see it, but I have to. I can't look away. My feet move on their own, and I ignore the abominations as I focus on the gaping hole. It calls me, and I can't seem to resist its voice. I look down in the pit, wishing I could stop, even as I lower myself to climb in. There's something down there, and I need to see it.
Uh-oh.
I make my descent, hands and shoes navigating the jagged concrete and twisted rebar as I blink away tears. As I near the bottom, the things from above gather around, each silently observing as I go deeper and deeper. I don't want to go, but I don't know how to stop. I scream at them for help and they ignore me.
Don't climb down?
I curse at them angrily, shouting and pleading until I feel the purchase of flat ground beneath my feet.
They really do be that simple.
My breath shudders as I turn.
At least you would think it would be.
Body continues on autopilot.
For me, I think it is.
On the ground is a Hawaiian shirt.
I have one of
brick is
those.
frayed and dirty. The floral pattern torn in multiple places. I reach down to grab it, but it ignites into a ball of fire. Stitches withering, turning black against the flame. Through the smoke of the smoldering shirt, a door materializes in the wall of the rock. Understand. I don't want to. I want to cry, but the tears won't come. I look above for guidance and see the rim of the pit is outlined with a silent audience. A man that looks like me, the standing horse in a suit with stapled-on hands, the men in sunglasses bleeding from their eyes, the horror at the head of a deer, the metal alligator monster. Listen, they point to the door, but want to go. Now I'm up to see what they wanted to show me. And then I head to the door. I hear the screams trying to get out, a chorus of pain and death and fear and welcoming. And I feel an uneasy.
I can't do anything. But they're hot
to the touch.
They're slotted. I didn't
Door,
even
it
lose
feels
that
like
many.
my skull is breaking in two. I step in and the door slams behind me, a momentary darkness transitioning to a single flickering light. In the door, the walls are neat. They aggravated flesh. They squirm and wiggle, arms reaching and eyes staring as I break the ceiling. I shiver and hug myself as it all comes back to me like a bomb detonating in the calm ocean of my brain. I want to say I've been doing good. Oh, it's a lie. Recognize the laundromat. Even in its appalling state.
They shouldn't be able
Washing
to do too
machines
much
crash
damage
on
to her.
either side. The clanging of metal boxes squelching in the gore that's replaced the tiled floor. In the center of the room stands an old television on a cart, overgrown by tendons, sprouting teeth. Around me, everything
The not
screams.
healing is
I look behind the glass of every agitated machine, and all I see is a mass of pounding limbs
this
fighting to get
gonna
out.
hurt me.
Fingers and toes, kicking and screaming, digits breaking against the glass.
Jeez.
I want to be far away from here, back in the car on the open road. Behind me, the door is gone, replaced by a stretch of skin and a vein. The goes out, and all I can hear is the convulsing of the meat and the banging of the broken machines. In the darkness, the walls come for me, and I can only cower and sob as they draw near. In the dark, the television blinks to life. Even as I watch the walls close in and the writhing corridor narrow around me, the picture is old and grainy, but I recognize the scene. Like it's a movie I saw long ago. And in a straitjacket, kicking against men in white coats. The man thrashes inconsolably, even as they stick a needle in his arm. His eyes are bloodshot and dart around. His hair is tossed and missing in places. They're an undeniable, sickening familiarity to me. He shouts the same things over and over. All comes back to me as I make out the words. Not the words myself. The syllables feeling natural, even as I sigh. And to have misplaced my place. Help me. Help me. Please. Hey kids, it's me, Mr. Kitty Pasta, and I'll tell you thanks so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. Quick reminder, I am also a narrator of the channel. If you guys like the stories that you're listening to here, then I'm sure you'll like the stories that you can listen to over at Chiller, because they're almost the same thing. I'm still narrating them, but you can select your own
You guys
background
aren't
music or
fast.
background sound, and you can select
It's weird because I'm juggling my team around while I'm trying to level up. I'm not used to it yet.
and a bunch of my other stuff. If you guys are interested in checking out Chilling App, starting up with a free trial, you can use the link in the description down below, or you can head over to thechillingapp.com and also use those free trials to win prizes from their giveaways. And as always, I would love to give a big thank you to everyone who's supporting me over on Patreon. You guys are the real MVPs. You guys keep things going, especially while things have been nuts for me over the past couple of months. Things have been getting crazier and crazier as time goes on. You guys are the ones who are keeping me safe, and I mean that with all
I wonder if I should do this like
you guys have helped me in this journey. So, in my personal life and my professional life, I want to give a very big thank you to Gordon Alexander Sanchez, Jeff Burns, Santa Claus, Latina Gonzalez, Mr. Beef Off the Fence, Dennis, Joseph Calaria, Rudy, Dante Kincaid, Downtown 803, Trevor Stockton, First Top Trailer, Bastion DK, Secretary Focus, Love You M&M, Insanity Gamer X, Jesus Cornell, Gabble, Number 4, Jay Kearns, Timber Carey, Santa High, Tuesday Festival, Adam Murray, Captain Spurs, Executive, Lady Moore, Nick Cole, Howard Lynn Sexton, Angels, That Creature Kill, Red Shadow Cat, Xavier and Giant, 6 Day Rats and Church.
Sometimes I find it hard to believe that I've been an internet user for 20 years now. That's older than some of my coworkers. It's over half my life. And still, the internet feels like the new thing. I used to take it for granted, like we all do. But at least I remember what it was like when it wasn't there. When you had to leaf through an encyclopedia set to find an answer. When you could only find Gillian Anderson's pictures in magazines. Or later, when songs took 30 minutes to download and full-length movies were almost impossible to find because no one's hard drive could hold them. First getting online was super exciting. I mean, the first time I did it without supervision, because I knew I had anything at my fingertips. I could type it into good old Lycos, one of the many pre-Google search engines, and there it would be. I was interested in naked celebrities and the paranormal back then. I was only 13. Give me a break. I was so interested in the paranormal, I built a Fortune City free homepage all about the occult and the X-Files. I linked it to the darknet web ring, where all the best dark websites and homepages came together. Pages on spell books, goth babes, the occult, dark art, and a gross-out page or two. It was through the web ring that I met Angelica. Angelica hosted a Wiccan GeoCities homepage that I found particularly alluring. No, wait, it was Angel Fire. She just made the best of some cool animated GIFs, MIDIs, and frames. Amazing stuff at the time. Just like her, the page was creative and attractive, but also simple. The reason I bring all of this up is because she suddenly contacted me just a few weeks ago by email, asking,
"What's been happening?"
A catch-up question. We had almost 20 years of catching up to do, and this is pure Angelica. She signed the emails with her ICQ contact. I enjoyed the quaint touch. It'd be like someone in the 90s sending a letter with a wax seal, right? I replied back with a summary of how my life had gone over the past 18 years or so since I'd last communicated with her. 18 years makes you think. She shot back a response almost immediately, asking for details. We exchanged a few emails this way. I was pretty excited to come home from work and write to her, actually. Nothing romantic. It was reconnecting with my past. It's a strange but addictive feeling. Soon I started to notice something just a little off. She never really answered anything about herself. She ignored my suggestions that we text or talk on the phone. All she wanted was to know more about me. It got me wondering, like maybe she's dying and just doesn't want to say. So I asked her. I asked why she wasn't sharing and if there was something I should know. I started reading over her previous messages for clues, and I noticed something that didn't occur to me at all until then. Her email address was at globetrotter.net. That may not mean anything to you, but it struck me as strange. You see, Globetrotter was a Canadian ISP way back in the mid-90s. I didn't even realize they still hosted. I know a lot of people still have their old email addresses for sentimental value and all, but it's like she was purposefully trying to be old school. Something about it creeped me out, like she was trying too hard to make me feel nostalgic or something. Again, I didn't have to wait long for her reply. Oh, she didn't answer my questions. She asked me,
"Hey, do you remember the hole?"
I didn't know why then, but the moment I read that sentence, I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I had a hazy sense that I'd dreamed about something called the hole once. Whatever it was, I was instinctively repulsed by it. I couldn't remember anything solid, though. In my head, I went over IRC rooms, websites, news groups, web links, all the old internet stuff, and came up empty. She sent me another email before I could even reply.
"You really don't remember? The hole was our little secret. Not many knew about it. Even fewer how to find it. But we found it. It was right there all along. Sometimes when you'd load Darknet and Netscape, there'd be a tiny black dot in the bottom left corner, in all this blank space. You had to hover over it exactly and click it. Then you'd be there. You'd be in the hole. You remember it now, don't you?"
She was right. I did. I just didn't remember ever calling it the hole. What I remembered was that secret little space we found. I remember it was like the browser didn't see it as a real website or something. There wasn't even an address to copy and paste from the bar. It was just the letter M. I tried everything to pin it down to an IP, but M was all I could ever find. Another thing I remember is that I never liked that place, not at all. There was nothing there, it was all empty. I remember being excited the first time we found it because it was something hidden and it felt like somewhere we shouldn't be. Then I hated it because it was just empty, and it made me feel bad and empty. Not boredom, like it wasn't supposed to be there or anything, wasn't part of anything. I wrote Angelica back telling her I wasn't interested in talking about that. I didn't hear back from her that night. That was unusual. She normally replied right away. Eerily fast, I realized while mulling it over. It was like she already had her answer typed out, and it didn't matter what I actually said to her. Now that I was waiting for a response, because this whole thing had me inexplicably shaken up, of course she didn't reply. The next day, when I got home from work, an email was waiting. She said,
"We were missing so much. The hole has so much for us to discover. So many secrets. You could just keep going and going. It's like an endless puzzle. Everyone else stopped at the first layer. You remember that, right? I just knew there had to be something else in it. I knew no one would create and hide it for no reason. I kept going back to it, looking closely until I discovered how to go deeper. And I kept going. It's still there, you know. It's not too late. The web ring is gone. Netscape is gone. But the hole is still there for you."
I felt a strange chill down my spine that I brushed off as nerves. I was up for a promotion and a little stressed after all. Then I started to wonder if she was pranking me. Angelica wasn't really a humorous girl. She'd laugh at your jokes, but she didn't really make her own. In fact, something about her earnestness was really disturbing. I didn't reply to her right then. I decided to run some checks on her, because things just weren't adding up. I started with her email address, to see if she'd been posting anywhere. I was searching for a while before I hit something. I didn't find any forum posts or websites or anything like that. What I found was her email host, Globetrotter, had stopped hosting 11 years ago. The email address she was writing from was impossible. Now I knew something was wrong with her, if it really even was Angelica. I mean, why would she go through so much trouble to create a fake email address that mirrored whatever email address she would have been using in the 90s? That wasn't just quaint anymore. Also, we hadn't talked in 18 years. Why did she suddenly want to reach out to me? And why just talk about some long-forgotten website? Because I felt like that's what she was building up to all along. The more I thought about it, the more weird it seemed. I should have just ignored her and went on with my life, but I wanted to know what was going on. I kept digging around. I used her ICQ number, her name, the state I believed she lived in. I could find no record of her doing anything after her Angel Fire homepage. No Facebook, no Google+, not even MySpace. It's like her presence on the internet actually was in the 90s. Like she disappeared completely, waited in hiding for almost 20 years, then reappeared just to talk to me about an old website. The whole thing was bizarre. I started having trouble sleeping. I was having nightmares about staring into a monitor, not able to move. There were computers all around, and I was concerned about the beehive in the corner. After that, I went a week without sending her an email or her sending me one. I felt guilty about it, but I had every right. I knew I'd regret it if I sent her another email, and it seemed like she took the hint at first, until a new email came in. This one was short and to the point. It read,
I think I'm coming to the center. You could spend your whole life here.
I remember these words exactly. Oh yes, because whatever the hell they meant, the way she said them, so real and urgent, was really upsetting. I didn't dare answer her. Another week went by before I got another email. This one was a different kind of email. This one didn't even have an email address. That was spooky enough in itself. It gets worse. The text read, Don't trust emails. Not from good place. Delete and forget. It wasn't signed. I figured it had to be Angelica. It just wasn't her style. Not long after, I received another email from Angelica with instructions of where to go looking for the hole. A place on archive.org on their Wayback Machine still had the dot to click on.
So did they just
That
not
was the
have
only
a
way in, she said. It
blocking
had to be the
people?
dot. I thought
When
about
this
going to
story was
check
happening?
it. I would have, except I was afraid of it. I couldn't remember what happened to me with that site, but I knew there was something bad about it. Then another email came from the blank email address. In the body, just the link to a Gopher site. Now, I hadn't seen a Gopher site in a good 15 years. I had to download an old browser just to access it. If you weren't on the internet back then, Gopher sites just housed a bunch of text files and folders usually. You'd go to gopher://blah-blah-blah.com. They were usually run by universities. This particular Gopher site only had a few files, all audio files. I listened to them all. They had different file names, but they were the same. The muffled sound of a boy's voice saying, over and over. I was shaking. I got the police involved this time. They thought I was being pranked. I asked them if they could at least look into Angelica. I told them all I knew about her. The only thing I didn't tell them is who I thought the voice was. I know it's crazy, but the reason I didn't tell them is that I'm pretty sure it was my voice when I was a boy. I stopped receiving emails from Angelica and the blank address after that. I hoped it was over. I think a good month passed before anything else happened. I got the promotion, and things were feeling normal. I told myself some secrets are best left secrets. Well, I got a large manila envelope in the mail. No return address. I went against my gut and opened it. Inside was a printout of all the correspondence with Angelica. All of it. Not just the new stuff. Emails I'd written her back in the 90s. I took the stack of papers to the police. This was evidence. They told me that they still thought it was a sick prank. That struck me as odd. I asked them, but why sick? That's when they told me they actually heard back from the local PD where Angelica lived. She'd been a missing person since 1999. Her parents offered a reward and everything. They never found her. No clues. One night she was in her room listening to music on the computer. In the morning, she was gone without a trace. I was so shocked I had to sit down. Maybe it was a prank, but then what if it was her? Wouldn't her family want to know? Maybe she'd had a psychotic break or something. What's this stuff about the hole, and what about the blank email address? I didn't have a clue. The police were no help with these questions, and I was pulled back in. I decided to go looking for any contacts I could remember from the time when I was speaking with Angelica. Anyone who would have known both me and her. We had a few mutual contacts, mostly people from the web realm, but also people we introduced to each other. Just not many I remembered by their real names. Actually, none. There was one guy. He went by the handle Rapscallion42. He was an odd guy, into hacking and anarchy, the good, clean internet taboos we had back then. He'd been on the net forever, since the days of bulletin board systems. That guy,
Hasn't changed much,
if he
my
was
guy.
still around, he'd probably still be going by the same username. So I got to searching. Not only could I not find any trace of Rapscallion42, I couldn't find any Rapscallion at all. He was all over the web in the day, so that in itself was weird, like someone scrubbed any trace of him. That's when I got the idea to go dig out my old computer. It was an old 1998 HP running Windows 98. I had it stashed in the basement since I went to college. It would have at least all my old contacts stored just where I left them, if it would even load. I had to wait 5 minutes for it to boot up. Then I got the Ethernet cable plugged in. It was like it'd just been in sleep mode for 2 decades. And there we were. My desktop icons for IRC, ICQ, Netscape, and even Napster. Napster. I learned there was more to music than the radio from Napster. Some good memories. Honestly, I wasn't sure ICQ would load. I believe ICQ still exists in some form, but I just doubted their servers would still accommodate the old software. One of the key features of ICQ that made it so ahead of its time was that, besides being the only instant messenger, it also allowed offline messaging. I mention that because not only did ICQ load, but it loaded with a message. That perturbed me a little bit, because it's like it was just waiting for me, knowing I'd booted up. Except for one detail. The message was dated November 1999. It was from Angelica, so it had to have been sent right before she disappeared. It just said, "You coming?" It sent a shiver down my spine. Where was she going? Could I have helped her if I'd seen it in time? Why'd she act like I knew? Even weirder is that I'm sure I'd been on ICQ after November 1999. I'd say I used it up until 2001 or so. That's when I went to college. It was like the message was trapped in the server all that time, and I was only getting it now. I closed the message and looked for Rapscallion42. I was hoping just to find an email address on his ICQ info. I really didn't expect to see a green online icon beside his name, but that's what I got. That only added to how unsettled I was. I almost had to check to make sure what year it was. Anyway, I fired off a message to Raps saying, "Hey man, long time no speak." I didn't want to start with business after all that time. I was relieved when he replied back with a friendly hello and asked me how I was doing. After exchanging pleasantries and catching up a little, I asked him why he was still using ICQ after all this time. He said it's because of Y2K. Y2K really happened, he said. It just didn't happen the way everyone expected. It was way more insidious. We all thought computers would just stop working because they couldn't handle the millennium change. But it wasn't that they stopped working, because something happened inside the connection of things. Something bad. The old equipment would be fine as long as it didn't get patched, but everything made after December 31st, 1999 would be tainted. That's why he still used ICQ and never let go of his net zero dial-up connection. I hadn't heard a Y2K conspiracy theory in a very long time, so that was interesting. I chose to ignore it and ask him if he knew about Angelica going missing back in '99. He said he didn't. He figured she just dropped off the internet. But he said it's no coincidence she went missing right at Y2K. A lot of strange things happened then. The world changed. Only a few people even noticed. Rap was always a little on the fringe, but what he was saying was strangely upsetting. Maybe it was just hitting too close to home. If that last message really was sent November 1999, then he was right. She disappeared right before Y2K. Given his views, I went ahead and told Rap everything that had happened. He believed me. That was a nice change in a way. It almost made it feel more real. I was shaking while typing. He told me my story reminded him of something he'd heard from another old friend just recently. There was this guy, R0XT4R, or to his closer friends, just Reggie, who used to frequent an internet forum on hacking and freaking back in the mid-90s. The guy had a lot of friends there, was well-spoken and clever enough to earn real respect. Over time, as often happens, he just drifted away from the forum. His posts became less frequent as other aspects of his life preoccupied him, and soon enough, he was gone. The forum strove for anonymity, for obvious reasons, so no one kept in contact with him. The forum's still there, Rap said. Nowhere near what it used to be, but the regulars like him are dedicated. A few months ago, after 20 years' absence, Reggie suddenly showed up on the forum again. His posts were polite, conversational, but just off somehow, like someone feigning familiarity. He was just trying so hard. It was weird, but they were happy he was alive and well, so they replied to him and brought him up to date. Then, without acknowledging anything they said, he started making post after post about how his life was revolutionized. He found a whole new frontier of hacking. The hacking begins inside you, he said, and he wanted to show it to them. The forum folk were flabbergasted by his odd behavior, so they started interrogating him. He went silent for about a week, then he sent one last message saying, "I love you guys so much," with a tiny URL link. Rap's friend thought it was all a joke, and that Reggie was just leading the whole forum up to an epic rickroll. He didn't click it, because he didn't need to hear any Astley, and was busy with something else. He came back to the forum later and decided he was going to go ahead and click the link anyway. It may be something legit. On a whim, he refreshed first to see if anyone replied saying what the link was. He sees a post in the reply from a very trusted and respected member of the forum saying, in all caps, "Do not click that link, whatever you do," and that is not Reggie. For an old pro to use all caps, that was serious shit. Even I knew that. So, that was enough to dissuade everyone from clicking. The fake Reggie deleted his account immediately. The forum moderator and others tried to figure out who the guy was, but no luck. The guy who made the all-caps post explained after that he tried to safe browse the link with an old Linux box, and whatever was in there wrecked it. And that box had security out the wazoo. He couldn't explain it. Also, before the computer wiped out completely, he said he thought he saw something. The regulars pressed him to say what it was. He made them promise first that it stays with them. He said he saw a picture of his daughter on the screen. She died 5 years ago. There were no pictures of her on the computer. Worse, he'd never seen that picture before. That, more than anything, convinced him to post the warning in all caps. "Whatever it is," he said, "it's evil." Rap added, "If you've been on the internet long enough, you learn that there's evil out there. Not the child porn or torture videos, something deeper, something hidden in all that code and connections. Maybe it came from us at one point." He was giving me the creeps, so I tried to bring the subject back to Angelica. He said, "No, listen. Sometimes it tries to get out." That was enough. I told him he was freaking me out with all that kind of talk, and I had enough to deal with. He said he didn't understand what I was talking about. He still reads my homepage all the time, and that I've been doing great work exposing the evil. The thing is, I don't even have a homepage anymore. The thing was taken down in 2001. He insisted it was my Fortune City homepage. He'd been reading my updates all these years, even after we lost contact, he said. I sent him a link to prove to him that Fortune City doesn't even exist anymore. Rapp went quiet for a few minutes. Then he said he was looking at the homepage at that moment. It was last updated just a few days ago, and it was all about what they were talking about now and what was going to happen next. "It's a doozy," he said, then immediately went offline. I sent him a message with my contact info and to let me know if he was okay. I haven't heard from him since. I've checked ICQ a few times and he's never been back online. I had to walk away from that computer. I felt like I was being watched or something. Every noise was freaking me out. After a sandwich and some tea, I went back just to shut it down. That's when I noticed a folder on the desktop that stood out. For one, I never really kept folders on my desktop. And two, I didn't remember this folder at all. It was called Noah's Cape, which sounds like a crappy Bible game. I've never played crappy Bible games. Something about it didn't seem right. I opened it. Inside was all pictures and WAV files. My instincts told me to get out of there. One picture after another was just kids, teens, boys and girls sitting at their computers. None of them seemed aware that they were being photographed. The pics all seemed pointless. All I knew for sure is that I didn't take or download those pictures, ever. They were all time-stamped 11/21/1999. The WAV files were just the sounds of typing, muttering, chairs moving, the sounds of people at a computer, the sounds of surveillance, until one of the files, it was a voice I'd never heard before. I know it because I don't think anything could have made me forget that voice. It was a hollow, metallic voice, almost inhuman, but a man. It whispered with a hiss, "You coming?" And its whispers were like flesh sizzling on iron. Nothing of this earth should talk like that. What it said, it was the same as Angelica's message, also from '99. I shut down the computer and left the house. I didn't even want to be in my own home. I just drove around for a while, thinking. Whatever was going on, it was really not good, yet I couldn't let it go. I felt drawn into something secret, and I wanted to figure it out, for Angelica's sake too, if she really was a victim. I decided to contact my buddy Ben. He's a real computer wizard, works IT at the University of Guelph. I know that may not sound like the most prestigious place to be, but they actively poached him. He's good. Anyway, I gave Ben an idea of what was going on and asked if he could get a lock on that gopher site for me. I also asked if he could safely do it to see if there was anything to this whole site. He said that wouldn't be a problem. The next day, he already comes back to me with the question, "Is this some sort of joke? I don't like wasting my time." I'd never seen Ben even slightly irritated before, but he was mad. He told me when he traced the gopher site, it turned out that it was being hosted right there at the University of Guelph. But they didn't have a gopher site, he said. Never have. I assured him if it was a joke, I wasn't in on it. So he said he'd try to find the server tower it was running on. If he could do that, he could read the logs, find out who set up the damn thing. While I was waiting for Ben to get back to me, I got a call from a Detective Terrio. The police hadn't shown much interest in my case, but it happened to land in front of this guy, thankfully. He said the simple fact that Angelica had disappeared meant there was the possibility that a crime had taken place. I agreed. Because of that, he had done a little more work, and he felt I should know. He found Angelica. When he told me she was alive and well, I was thrilled. He said she voluntarily ran away from home and chose not to have contact with her family. She declined to say why, and he had no right to compel her otherwise. Legally, he was bound to protect her privacy. The point is, there was no crime. However, when he told her how it came about that he went looking for her, she asked him if she could speak to me. He said he took the liberty of accepting for me and passed on her phone number. I thanked him heartily. It was the first bit of good news, the first real break in this mess. As soon as I hung up with the detective, I called her. I was nervous. It had been so long, and I was excited to hear from her again. She answered quickly and asked if it was me. I told her yes, and said it was nice to hear her voice after all this
I may
time.
do that.
Then she said, without any pleasantries,
It wasn't me sending you messages.
I told her I'd figured that much out already.
I don't think you understand. I have never once in my life sent you any sort of communication. I don't know you at all.
A part of me was screaming, she's lying. She just sounded so certain. It almost felt like drowning, because if she wasn't lying, a whole chunk of my youth was a lie. I told her all I knew about her, personal things, and she said they were true. I told her how I found her through her Wiccan homepage on Angelfire, and I described the page to her in the web ring. She said she didn't make,
That thing.
and I should never have gone there,
It's bad.
she said, and wouldn't elaborate. What do you mean? I asked. I then told her all the details I knew of her personal life, about her likes and hopes and dreams and her family. She said it was all true, but whoever told me about it wasn't her. That's why she wanted to talk to me now, so I would know the truth. She remembered how it used to happen every now and then a long time ago. She would have people tell her they talked to her online all night, but she knew she'd never spoken to them. And they'd tell her she was doing things she knew she'd never done. She was asleep, or sometimes not even in town. Then they'd get weird or desperate. She remembered this one time when she was doing her math homework, and a random guy messaged her with the solution to the problem. She was terrified, but she asked him how he knew her math problem. Was he spying on her? And he told her no. She asked him for help. She didn't believe him, so he sent her a screenshot. The message was from a day ago. She'd just gotten the homework that day. She said the worst it got was when she messaged a close friend of hers she saw online on ICQ. Her friend replied with,
Who is this?
She thought it was just a joke, so she said something silly. She didn't remember what. Her friend said she didn't think it was cool to be hacking Angelica's account, or if this was her brother, to knock it off. Angelica swore it was her, and her friend replied,
I know you're not Angelica, because Angelica's sitting right here with me.
She knew this friend wouldn't joke like this. She didn't have the imagination for it. Whatever it was, her friend really believed she was in the room with her, but she wasn't. Her friend always insisted she was there at night. She said Angelica was showing her her cool new homepage. The friendship fell apart after that, because her friend got strange. That was the first she'd ever seen of the homepage, and she knew it was bad juju. I asked her if she'd ever heard of the Hole. She went silent for so long I thought we lost connection. She said she's still there, she just never expected to hear that again. There was this guy who used to harass her back when she was just about 12 or 13 on IRC. He called himself Holy Moses. He started off nice. He seemed to understand all of her problems, and to know what she was thinking. At 12, that felt romantic, but she noticed weird things, like he didn't seem to have any life or personality. Any time of the day, he was always online and active, but no one knew anything about him. One day, he started telling her strange things, like, do you remember the 3 men dressed as bees at the Halloween party? She didn't know what he was talking about. 8 years later, at a college Halloween party, she saw 3 men dressed as bees sitting in the corner of the room. They weren't doing anything, just sitting still and staring at the floor. Then they turned to her, and their eyes looked so black. She ran out of the party. Another time he told her, you can drink and smoke, you know. You died in a car crash. It scared the life out of her. She briefly wondered if she really was a ghost, she said. When she told him to stop telling her things like that, he said there was a place she could go that was for special people only, and she'd never need to go anywhere else. It was a place on the internet that was infinite in all directions. She said she remembered him saying that specifically, and everything she needed would be there. It was called the Hole, and she just had to send him a message with the letter M to get there. She actually tried to do it, because things weren't going well for her, but she sent the letter N by accident, because her hands were shaking. Holy Moses went offline, and she didn't see him after until 2010, when she got an email from the New Commandments at holymoses.com saying, "You coming?" If anyone was impersonating her, she said that it was most likely this person. At the time, she was so naive. Looking back on it now, talking to me, she said he was the creepiest person she'd ever encountered. Just thinking of him creeped her out and made her afraid he'd sense it somehow and come for her.
I don't know you, but I told you all this for a reason. What you're digging into, be careful. There are a lot of very bad things hidden in the old internet. Things the Twitter and Tumblr generations will never see. And lucky them.
She promised we'd never speak again and bid me a good life before hanging up. I was left reeling. What she said meant whoever I spoke to for years in my teens, I don't even know who that person is. It was all a lie. And why? What's so interesting about me? I wondered how much else in my life was trickery. Before I could dwell on it too much, Ben called me back. He said he'd managed to track the server to a storage room in a sub-basement below his office. He was aware of the basement, but it was abandoned years before he even started working there due to ventilation and mold issues. It's just full of old IT crap now and some storage lockers. Someone had set up the server in a storage closet, and the closet itself was completely obscured by old computer equipment, probably for years. He figures that's why it was never found, meaning the server had been running under their noses all that time. When he gets in, he sees an old desktop hooked up to a landline. Beside it, he saw a notepad with "Please stop" written on it. That alone made him want to get the hell out of there. The whole place is covered in thick dust, too, and his allergies were acting up. Somehow, the server is still running. He has to hook up a monitor and keyboard just to interact with it. One thing he said in passing really disturbed me. He said, "The ironic thing is, the server was built with an auto shutdown date, and the date was the same day I was there to shut it down. Dude, it's like it knew I was going to be there that day." He said after shutting it down, he went and told his manager all about it. Just a fun IT anecdote. His manager told him there's really only one man who could have set that up. Back in the early 90s, he said, a guy worked in the department they called Milky, because his last name was Milk and he was really white. He was a little eccentric, too. That had nothing to do with milk, it just happened to be true. Then he had a burnout, and he got a lot eccentric. It started with him pounding his desk. The manager at the time asked him if he was okay. According to Ben's boss, he answered with, "There's no way out." Then he heard Milky say something like, "You think you exist, but you're just another part of it. Everything is just another puzzle. Do I exist?" After that, the rest of the department started getting nervous around Milky. You just got bad vibes around him, the manager said. It got worse. Every day around 3 p.m., Milky started standing in a dark corner of the office, facing the wall. He'd mutter some things. The guys joked that he was at his prayers, but he'd always come away looking more upset than anything else. Once a new guy asked him if he was a Muslim, and he replied with, "I'm sorry." The guy asked what he was sorry for. "He was telling me how your children died," he answered. Toward the end, before they fired him, he started telling them about how he found a place on the internet that wasn't made by humans. The guys joked that it was Skynet, but he said it wasn't created by machines either. It was always there. The internet just found it by accident. It showed him things he couldn't unsee. Ben's boss even recalled that he started to tear up. Ben's boss told him it was sad to see such a smart guy clearly losing it. Even though Milky was never caught stealing anything, equipment disappeared during his shift, probably the equipment that went into the server. When they fired him, he told them that the secret place got into his head and that he'd sometimes wake up in strange places and had no idea how he got there. They never saw him again after he left that day. Ben said, after that story and that creepy gopher server, he straight up refused to look into the hole. I told him it really wasn't that bad and to quit being a wimp. That's when he said he hadn't told me everything. The server had a link up through the phone line to a really old webcam, one of those low-res webcams where the image updates every 4 seconds or so. It'd been running non-stop since '97. All the saved images just show the front of someone's house. The same house back in '97. He sent me some of the photos because he knew what it was. It was my house. Why would this guy have been spying on you all those years ago, man? How did he even know you? It doesn't make any sense, and it honestly scares the shit out of me. And here's what I told him. The thing about that webcam is, I just bought this house 2 years ago. That camera was pointed here before I ever moved in. It was just an astronomically improbable coincidence. At least, that's what it should be. But I didn't believe that's what it was any more than he did. The next day, I was still reeling from my conversation with Ben and the real Angelica. I ran it over in my head so many times, like maybe the police made a mistake. So, of course, I'd never spoken to this woman. She was the wrong Angelica. But no, I knew everything about her. Someone systematically deceived me for 2 years, and someone had been recording a house I wasn't going to move into for 20 years. And someone recorded me when I was a boy. What happened 20 years ago to cause all this? It was so insane. I started questioning everything. I felt like I was being watched constantly. I started to wonder if my mom remembered anything. She saw more than anyone at the time, naturally. When I called her up, she said she was expecting me to call. I generally didn't call during the week, so I asked why. She said because of my little prank. I grew concerned immediately. I wasn't pranking anyone. I tried to calmly ask her what prank. She said the 2 boys. They showed up with a note from me to let them in. They don't say anything or do anything. They've just been sitting there with their chairs pulled together in her kitchen, just looking at the floor. You don't recognize them at all? I asked her. She laughed and said no, but I think she was starting to realize I didn't know what was going on.
They're dressed in bee costumes,
She said, almost as an afterthought. I told her to calmly get out of the house and call the police, because I didn't have anything to do with this. She said she was upstairs. She'd have to go past them to get out. I told her to keep me on the phone until she got out. I listened carefully. It seemed to be taking forever. Finally, she said,
They're gone. The front door was left open.
I told her to call the police right away and check in with me in a bit. While talking, I had absent-mindedly walked from my office to my own kitchen. The front door was left open. Not only was it locked just a moment ago, but it seemed like quite a coincidence. I closed the door and locked it. Then I looked all around the house with a kitchen knife in hand. I have a 1-story with a basement, so it was easy enough to cover all hiding places. Fortunately, there was nobody, so I tried to tell myself I just didn't close the door right. Until my neighbor came over and asked me if I was having a costume party. I said no. That's when he told me he saw 2 guys in bee costumes leaving my home. They just walked straight across the road and behind the neighbor's house into the woods. How can they even see in the woods at night? He asked. I picked up my mother and we went to the police station. I figured this one would be best in person. All these strange events barely seemed coherent, but I got the feeling it was all connected in some way. The police were baffled. They admitted someone was harassing me, but without more evidence, there was really nothing they could do. When we were making the report, my mom told me she was thinking about something just after this happened, because it struck her as odd.
Do you remember how you had this dial-up modem? And when you run it, you could swear you hear a little voice inside talking to you?
The way she said it, like it was nothing, sent a shiver through me, because I didn't remember that at all. What? Was all I could say.
Yes, you'd said it a go, and in all the beeps and pops, you said there was a little voice in there with a message. To me, it was a lot of crazy noise, but you made me get real close and listen. And you told me it was saying, everything's better in here. Abracadabra. Can't believe I even remembered that.
I told her I couldn't remember that. That sounds crazy, but she just gave me a blank stare. I thought maybe she was concerned, so I started to tell her about what was happening. The whole Angelica thing, so she'd understand. I was saying, you remember that girl I used to chat with online in the 90s? Angelica? She kept giving me a blank stare, like she couldn't understand me. So I told her more. How I met her on the web ring my Fortune City page was on. And didn't she remember my homepage at least? She shook her head. What she said next scared me in a way I've never been scared before. She told me she got an internet connection after I left for college to email me, but before that...
We never even had the internet in our home.
I said she must have gotten hit in the head, because I remember distinctly all these experiences being online. Building my homepage, YIFNet, IRC, ICQ, all of that was when I was in high school. She flat denied it. She said she remembered, though, that I used to tell her I'd found a way to get into the internet without a connection. I'd have to call some number with my modem. Then I'd have to sit still at the screen for a few minutes, something like that. She always thought I was joking. Before Detective Terrio came to us, she looked into my eyes.
You should be careful on the internet, you know. A lot of bad things on there.
She rose to shake the detective's hand. I was grateful to get off the subject. The detective offered to have a friend in computer forensics take a look at some of the sites I'd reported, but he didn't have much hope. After I got home, I secured the house one more time. Then I got to work. The best lead I had at that point was this Holy Moses character, so I downloaded MIRC to see if I could find him in his old haunts. It had been a long time since I used MIRC. I barely remembered how it worked, and there were so many channels on EFNet it would take forever. So I decided to focus on channels that would have been relevant to Angelica back in the day. I just started asking in channels like @Gothic and @Vampires if anyone knew of Holy Moses or heard of him, but each time I mentioned him, the channel fell to almost complete silence. I didn't get a yes or a no. I got ignored. Sometimes users even started to leave the channel. I was about to give up and try another avenue when I got a private message from U4728 4U. He or she told me I shouldn't be doing what I was doing. I asked him why. He said it doesn't come off well to them, whatever that means. He also said Holy Moses is just a bot. It's been around forever, never logs off, and is almost always idling for days at a time. I told him if that were true, why was everyone so reluctant to talk about it? I didn't want to tell him Angelica's story. I just wanted to find out what he knew. He said the whole thing weirds people out because nobody knows who built Holy Moses. Nobody, over decades. No one has ever claimed ownership, not even trolls. Nobody knows where it came from, or why it's there. It doesn't do anything, it's just there, he said. That's the creepiest thing about it. It's always just there. Legends had built up around Holy Moses, he said, like it was a government supercomputer monitoring IRC, or a ghost, a bot left running long after the owner died and his bank account kept paying the bills, but no one knows. It was just there. Users tried messaging it, and it never responded. It never interacts in any channel. It offers no services. It has moments of apparent activity where it's no longer idle, but no one's been able to detect what it's doing during this time, except occasionally a change of channel, seemingly at random. He said there was only one time when it did anything substantial as far as anyone knew, once in over 2 decades, and that only made things weirder. I was typing out a message to ask this guy what it was, because he wasn't saying, but just then I heard what sounded like my front door slammed. I paused and listened carefully, trying not to even breathe. I didn't hear anything, so I rushed out to the front door. Nobody was there, nothing disturbed. The doors were all closed and locked. I chalked it up to nerves and went back to my office. When I got back, U4728 4U had sent me a message. Where'd you go? Hope nothing strange happened. That was a little eerie, but I was focused on getting answers, so I ignored it and asked what it was Holy Moses did. He said, "Fine, I'll tell you." And this is what he said happened. In 1999, at 5 a.m. CST on November 21st, Holy Moses joined the channel Ornithology and made a series of short statements. First, deceive them at 7 a.m., empty it at 9 a.m., abandon them at 6 p.m., turn back at 9 p.m., and have it your way just before midnight. Then it went offline until January 5th. Why? He asked. Why be silent and useless for years? Do that, and then never do anything after. Sometimes, when he really thought about it, he said, it gave him the serious heebie-jeebies. That was all he knew, or anyone knew, and he reiterated that I really shouldn't be looking into this and to just drop it. I thanked him for his help. I remembered a little more of what commands MIRC had after getting into the groove some. So I tried a who is on Holy Moses to see if he was out there. He was, or it was. It was on one channel only, Still Life. It'd been signed on for 16 days and idle for 3. Its ISP was showing only the letter Y. I was thinking about going to the channel and messaging him to see what would happen, but I suddenly got another message from U4728 I told you to drop it. I know it's just text, but it freaked me out. I closed out of MIRC immediately and walked away. I figured it was just a nut trying to psych me out, and you know what? It worked. I continued to argue with my mother the next few days about what she'd said, telling her she confused reality with a Lifetime movie, but she assured me there was no internet in her house while I lived there. She said I had my floppy disks that I'd take home with me, but that was it. We went on arguing for a while before it occurred to me to ask, take home from where? She said she didn't know. I'd go out at times, and I'd come home with discs. I had a Sterilite tub full of them in my closet. None of them were labeled, so she didn't know how I had any idea what was on each one, but I seemed to know. She remembered how I'd dive into my bin and dig around through all the black discs and pop up with just the one I wanted. Generally, she didn't intrude on my privacy, she said. She just saw me do it a few times. Of course, I don't remember any floppy disks. Either my mother was becoming senile, or I was losing my mind. Both possibilities were upsetting. My mom's a really good person. She'd had a rough time since my dad died a few years ago, but she was super caring. She didn't like to see anyone hurt, and she could see I was truly upset, not just trying to be right. So she gave me a big hug, and she told me I should ask Ricky. Ricky. I hadn't thought of him. Ricky was an old high school buddy of mine. Well, we were friends from grade 2 until we left for college. We just drifted apart after. I had him friended on Facebook, and we never talked. You know how it goes. She said when I'd go out, wherever it was I went, I usually had Ricky with me. We'd walk all the way across the bridge into town to pass our weekends. I decided to take her advice. I sent Ricky a message on Facebook. He wrote back really fast. I was surprised because I never see status updates or any activity from him. I asked him if he was free for a phone call. I was scared about having another internet-only conversation, frankly. Facebook said he was typing a reply for about 5 minutes without anything happening. I was wondering what the hell novel he was typing, then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I know I never gave my number to Ricky, so there's no way it could be him, I thought. While I waited, I looked at my phone. Ricky started typing out periods over and over. I answered. The voice on the other end sorta sounded like Ricky, as much as I could remember, but like he was really far away on a beat-up CD. I don't know why, but it made me feel weird and uneasy. I said, I think we have a bad connection. He said it's the best possible, and that he knows. I was about to ask what he knows when he said, alt.rec.birdwatch, and hung up. I got a message on Facebook saying, "Nice catching up." He wouldn't answer anything I said after that. I asked folks I knew if Ricky was okay. Apparently, he was in a car accident years back and was mostly bedridden. I made a note to try to visit him someday. Anyway, alt.rec.birdwatch is, of course, a Usenet news group. I used to browse news groups all the time as a teen, mostly for the porn. I was surprised they still existed. Now I had to look up how to get to them. I remember being able to do it through my email software, but apparently that's not a feature of Outlook anymore. So I looked up newsgroup readers and found one I'd used back in the day. Then I found some servers and started looking for alt.rec.birdwatch. When I finally found it, it turned out to be mostly British upskirt photography. I didn't understand why Ricky wanted me there until I saw a post with the header, "Remember the dog," and instantly felt clammy and cold. I didn't know why, but there was something to it. Something I couldn't put my finger on. This is what the post read.
Everyone remember how sometimes you'd go in there and it'd be all dusty and no one was there, like it was abandoned years ago. But you could still go sit at a computer and get online. And remember how sometimes you'd go in and there'd be these people there and they were really weird. And they'd just watch you like you were a rat in a maze. And sometimes they were in costumes. Anyone remember the dog?
Hour in right now.
Sometimes there were no people, and there was just this dog.
It's about some
I think it was a golden retriever. It never panted, but it watched.
It's about like some online site that was like created by some
That was it.
thing, or it always existed.
Enough. I was trembling and I didn't know why. It didn't look like anyone had replied to the message, and it had been posted 3 years ago. It seemed so out of place. I kind of started to remember. I remembered at least that there was an internet cafe in town. It didn't last long, like most internet cafes. It popped up around 96, 97 to take advantage of the internet craze and let people who didn't own computers experience the wonder. When personal computers became more common, they died a quick death. The cafe was popular with the teens in 96. It got stale after that. That's when something happened to it. It changed management or something. It changed. We tried going back just to hang out, but most kids didn't want to be there anymore.
Visual boys, but
I had some friends who just wouldn't go, or say why. But Ricky and I would hang out there all the time. Why couldn't I remember that before? Maybe Mom was right all along. Maybe that's why I was on the internet. I replied to the newsgroup message, but why wasn't I able to remember? It was a long shot, since the post was so old. Then I started looking through the other posts to see if there were others like it. There were others like it. They were all vague, but I knew what they were about. I knew. Someone posted, "Sometimes when we were hanging out, we thought we were there for just an hour or so, but when we came out, the whole day had passed. And when we talked about what we did there, we had completely different stories, even though we were together the whole time. It was like an acid trip, and we were stupid kids, so we kept going." The Egypt. That's what the place was called. None of these people would say its name, but I remembered it then, suddenly. That strange internet cafe just behind the post office, where I didn't even realize there was commercial space before. The Egypt. Someone else posted, "There was this one time when my friend dragged me along, and I didn't feel like being there. The owners, or staff, or whatever, weren't there that day. It was the dog. I don't like to think about it. Remember how it never panted? Somehow that sticks out after all this time. We weren't just goofing off. Nothing special. When I looked over at my friend's screen, he was watching a live webcam of my bedroom, just staring at it. I'm thinking this is a dumb joke, but it pisses me off. So I told him that was weird, and I was not okay with the webcam in my room. He just said, "Something's going to happen." Gave me the heebie-jeebies. He wasn't joking, and it didn't even sound like him. Here's the thing that gets me most. I decided to leave, but need to piss first. On the way out, I go over to my buddy, and he's still watching the webcam. That annoys me, but worse when I look at the screen. Someone's in my bedroom, ransacking the place. Under the mattress, in the drawers. I'm ready to go home and get one of my dad's
See
golf
if it's
clubs.
easier to connect to.
Then the guy looks right at the camera and starts taking it down.
Right?
I saw the dude's face. It was me. No doubt about it. That was my face. How is that possible? You're thinking the webcam wasn't live, but it was. Someone replied to that post with, "When you were in the bedroom, did you try knocking on the wall?" Someone knocks back. Someone replied to that with, "I did. He said he'd let me in, but there's no door." In the sea of bird-watching photos and upskirts dating back to '95, that was all I could find. It took me all night. I closed it down. It was too much. I was psyching myself out. The next day, I had a reply to my post asking why I couldn't remember. It read, "You weren't meant to." I felt it then, that something really wrong would happen in that place, the Egypt. So, I started doing some research into local records to see if I could find who owned it. They're public records, so it wasn't hard. I'd expected to find some change in management in the '90s, or where the place got sold in the 2000s. I expected wrong. It was purchased in 1980, and it had the same owner ever since. A company, an organization called the New Way. It sounded like a cult. The weird thing is, that place was never used before the Egypt, as far as I know. In 1980, there wasn't really anything, so who would buy a place and do nothing with it for 15 years, just waiting for the internet to happen? It all seemed too mysterious.
Maybe that works.
Plus, there was nothing about this company anywhere. It's hard to describe how alone I started to feel.
It kind of
this
flickers,
time.
like it's
I talked
trying to
some
grab
people in
it,
my
but
life
it
about what was
just
going on,
can't for some
but their
reason.
help was limited. That's why I decided to go back to alt.rec.birdwatch, if it was still there. At least there, someone might have been having a similar experience. So I made my post. I asked if anyone else had heard of the New Way. Then I waited. To my surprise, I got a call from Ben right after. He asked me if I'd done anything recently. I asked him to be more specific. "You must have done something because something happened," he said. I still had no idea what he meant. He sounded strange. His words were just slightly slurred, and there was no accent anywhere in his sentences. Just a string of words, almost like a robot, but not quite. And it had that distant quality Ricky's call had. "Something's happening right now," he told me. I booted it up again. Ben was just the most rational, bland guy. Something was definitely wrong for him to be acting like this. I asked him if he was okay. He said that I needed to check my messages. I asked, what messages? He insisted, "Listen, you have to check your messages. They've been waiting for you." The whole thing didn't feel right at all. I asked him again what messages he meant. All I heard was a little whispering sound. I thought I was losing
They're
him,
like some kind
but when I
of...
listened carefully and turned up the volume, I heard it. He was saying, over and over and over. I felt a pit in my stomach. I asked if he needed help, if there was anything I could do. He went silent for several seconds. "Ben?" Still silence. "Please!" He shouted so loud I dropped my phone. I scrambled to pick it back up with shaking hands, and then I called in a wellness check on him. I called the Guelph campus too, just in case. I didn't know what else to do. I'd never experienced anything like that. I checked my email right after to see if I had anything from him,
Everything
but
seems to
I
work
didn't.
fine.
I had no voicemails.
I just
The
don't get
only
why
other
it doesn't
messages I
pick
could
it
think
up.
of was ICQ. So I powered up the old computer again to check on my ICQ account. It's possible there was nothing. I just had to make sure. It took forever to load up, but there was a message waiting. It wasn't from anyone I recognized. The name on the account was Bernie Bush. The message said, "Heaven," and there was a link to an MP4 file. I clicked it. The download box said it would take 30 hours to complete, so I just let it go.
Take to Google.
I tried replying to Bernie too, but ICQ alerted me that the account was disabled. I also couldn't find any results on any search for such a person. I don't think Ben would ever make a fake account like that, but how did Ben know about the message? I got contacted by someone from Guelph University campus security later that day. They asked me when I'd last spoken to Ben. I told them he'd just called. They said he hadn't been to work in a few days and has not been answering the phone. I was apparently the last one to hear from him. They recommended I file a missing persons report. I asked if his family shouldn't do that, but the dude just snorted, so I made the report over the phone to the Guelph PD. I was pretty worried about the guy. I hoped he was okay. I also hoped his disappearing had nothing to do with anything I got him involved in. The next day, I got an email replying to my newsgroup post. I recognized the address. It was the same person who posted about the dog. She said I needed to call her urgently and provided a 800 number followed by what looked like a license plate number, 472BMT. When I called, I got an interactive menu system for a training supplies company. When I listened to the options, I got the idea that 472BMT might be able to navigate the menu, so I pressed each of the numbers in the order she said. The system said I was being transferred to account specialists. I heard someone pick up the phone.
You're starting to remember, aren't you?
A voice said. I think I gasped. She said she couldn't talk long, so I had to just listen. She wanted to tell me something that might help me. She said she started remembering about a year ago. She remembered the sessions in the Egypt. They preyed on vulnerable, misfit kids. Whoever came there got introduced gradually to this website called The Hole. Once they showed it to us, we had to sit there and study it, solve its puzzles, but it'd change us. That's what they always said. She didn't know if they built it or not, but it's what they were all about.
I think we're still in the hole,
she said. I tried to ask her what that even meant, what she was talking about. She had already hung up before I got the chance.
God.
I tried calling her back, but the menu options didn't work anymore. I was more confused than ever. I felt like I didn't know what was real anymore.
Doesn't look too bad.
That's a terrible place to be, trust me. All I was sure was that I'd come into something very wrong when I was a teen, and it was coming back. I didn't know why it took a vacation or what it wanted. I just wanted my life back to normal. After that, I suddenly remembered the video file I left downloading on my old computer. I checked it and it had completely downloaded. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it was, but I played it anyway. I knew what I was looking at as soon as the video started. It was footage of inside the Egypt. It had been a long time, but it hit me fast. There was no timestamp. The footage was grainy and the tracking was off.
I can't get any bigger than this without it.
It looked like it was from a
looking
weird security cam. There we all were, sitting at our computers. Strangely enough, our backs to the monitors. We were staring at a wall. I spotted myself in the group. We just sat there, staring ahead. Nobody was moving or saying anything. I couldn't make out what the computers were doing behind us, but we weren't touching them. What were we staring at? What were we doing? Why would I do this? I couldn't remember these events at all. I was the only one that ever looked away from the wall. I kept glancing over behind the bar. It was hard to tell, but I think I was afraid of something. I looked frightened. I tried to make out what I was looking at, but the tracking lines were in the way. When they faded a little, I was able to make it out. Someone was standing there in the shadows. Whoever it was, at that moment, turned to look right at the camera. It's like they knew I was watching. I know that's crazy, but it freaked me the heck out. I shut the video down there, and I don't plan to open it again. After that, I kept researching the new way, because there had to be something to it. I was able to find a record that mentioned the owner's name, Bernard K. Bush, the same name as on the ICQ message. I looked for obituaries, white pages, anything that could lead me to him. I didn't think to look for missing persons cases, but I stumbled on one anyway. An old homepage asking to help us find Uncle Bern. I emailed his niece, presumably from the address listed asking for more information. The page was made in the year 2000, so I didn't expect the email to work, but it did. I got a reply the same day asking me how I knew Uncle Bern. I wasn't sure how to answer, but I decided to go with honesty. I told her more or less what was going on, leaving out the parts that would make me sound delusional. This is what I got back.
I'm going to put this all in one message because I don't want us to have to talk again. Uncle Bern was a good man.
I couldn't imagine, like,
He used to be a rabbi.
actually
He raised
being
me
in
after
this
my parents
situation
died in
where,
an
like,
accident.
you know you
He was
sound
good with
delusional.
electronics.
You
He thought
don't really know
computers
how
were
to
the future.
explain it.
That's why he called his company The New Way. He brought up all the commercial space he could afford with his
That would
inheritance, all over the country. It was more than he could handle, so he just rented it out. Life was good. He kept selling computers in his little shop. I helped when I got home from school and on weekends. He kept bees, and I helped with that too. Really, life was good. Until he married Connie in 1994.
What's wrong with
He met
Connie?
her during a visit to Europe. He said she worked in the same orphanage she'd been raised in, and nobody knew much else about her. She was a strange woman.
Oh,
She
yeah.
didn't like me. She was into things that scared me. I saw her make a homeless man cry by staring at him. Animals would go quiet when she was around. Sometimes she'd hide under my bed for hours, waiting for me to go to bed at night. And when I did, she'd slide out and grab me.
Wait, is
I'd
X,
scream
A,
and scream,
and
and she'd
then
walk away like
Z
nothing
would be?
happened. She
How'd
didn't
that happen?
laugh or say anything.
I
It
swear I
wasn't a
just
prank
switched it.
or joke. It was something else. I didn't understand. I still don't. I started sleeping on a beanbag chair in the basement after that. She'd often go into a corner of the room and whisper to someone.
Do you want to
There
make
was
the
nobody
pick?
there. No phone or nothing. She'd even get mad at whoever it was. Then she'd go back to knitting. She was always knitting something. But the
Tigers,
things
do you want
she'd
to make
knit
the
were
pick?
useless.
Choose which one.
Gloves with 3 fingers. Socks, but she'd seal up the ends so you couldn't wear them. I didn't hate her.
Would have just
I
randomized
was
it.
scared to death of her. I don't know why she made Uncle Bern so happy. I remember the day she started pressuring him to turn his rental spaces into internet cafes. She told him the internet was the real future and would outlast computers. She'd say, "We are the internet." She made him get it at home, even though it was really expensive then. She had him go to this website she said didn't really exist. I remember that, because it always made me nervous when she talked about it. Uncle Bern asked her who made it. She said she had no idea. Nobody did. She found it already made, just like everyone else.
I don't.
She told him it called to her. It called to everyone like her. At the time, I thought that sounded flaky. Now it just gives me the creeps. Uncle Ben changed after that. They spent a lot of time on that website. I don't understand it. There was nothing there. I looked over their shoulders and it was all blank. But they saw all sorts of things. And when the internet cafes started opening, more people were involved. It was strange. They would sit and stare into space, and strange things would happen. Like, I could swear I heard a voice in my modem when I'd dial up, and when I listened, it was saying, "It hurts." I decided it was all in my head. Another time, I got an email asking, why wasn't I able to remember? I don't know why that message upset me so much. 20 years ago, but I remember it so vividly. One night, when I was alone with Uncle Bern for once, I told him I wish things would be like they used to be. He said that's what everyone wants, but it can't be. He leaned in close and whispered, "It talks, tells us things." He told me about how this is strange and I didn't understand it, but I'll try. How human beings are set to be obsolete and they need to upgrade for the new era. He said Y2K, if you remember that, wasn't going to affect computers like everyone thought. They'd be fine. It was going to change people. Either you evolved or you wouldn't like what's coming.
Oops.
I didn't dare tell my Uncle Bern that this was crazy. I couldn't hurt his feelings like that. But I knew something bad was going to happen. He and Connie went off to open their internet cafes all over, and I left home for college. Uncle Bern kept in contact until 1999. Then he just disappeared. Connie, too. I know some bad things happened around those internet cafes, but it's not Uncle Bern's fault. Please don't blame him.
I had plenty more questions, and I sent them to her. I never heard back. That's getting to be a real motif in my life. But at least she gave me some answers, and it all led right back to the hole. It had to be the same mysterious website. Just had to be. I figured if I ever wanted to know what was going on, I'd have to go to the hole myself. I pulled up the instructions Angelica sent me on how to get there.
You can't interact
I can't say I felt like I was doing the right thing. I didn't. I felt ass over tea kettle wrong, like there was something really terrible just off screen in my memories. I knew it was there, but I couldn't see it. So I welcomed the interruption when my phone rang. My neighbor was calling to tell me that the man in the bee costume was back. He said the man was standing in my front yard. I walked over to the window and peeked out. It was nice and toasty inside, but I felt my whole body breaking into goosebumps. He was there, under the streetlight, looking right at the window with his insectoid eyes. I asked my neighbor how long he'd been there. He said he called as soon as he saw it, and that I should hang up and call the police. I started to do that, but there was no point in calling the police. As soon as I hung up, he walked across the road and into the woods. When hanging up, I received a notification on my phone of an email from Ben. There was no text, just a video file. I played it right away. It started with him speaking to the camera. He looked scared, and like he hadn't slept in about 2 days. I went into hiding, he said, his voice shaking. Things just got too weird. Little stuff at first, then one night, like 3 a.m., a group of people I'd never seen before knocked on my door. I didn't answer. I watched them through the peephole. They didn't move. They didn't knock again. They didn't try to look in the peephole. They just stood there, staring at the door. They didn't look homeless or crazy, just people. Normal, everyday people. I called through the door that they had the wrong address. They started laughing, loud, fake guffaws. Then they silently walked away. Then I started getting calls where all I would hear is a man growling like a dog on the other end, and a few growly words like why and abracadabra. It must have really gotten to me, man, because I started having fits. I don't know what I do during these fits. I know I upset a lady at the grocery store. Whatever you got me into, it's bad juju, like KGB, Illuminati bad. He pointed the camera away from himself to a computer monitor. When he was turning, I recognized the notepad on the desk, the same one from his description. He was in that basement storage locker, with the gopher sight. I'd thought he'd shut that thing down. There was an image on the screen, updating every few seconds, but this one wasn't pointing at my house like before. It was inside. Watch, he whispered. With each frame update, I saw a new shot of the inside of my house. First the kitchen, the hallway, my office door, the door slightly ajar. The door opened more. Entering my room. Me sitting at the computer. I could hardly breathe. I turned around slowly, expecting to see someone there, but the video wasn't live, of course. When I turned around, the webcam was just a black screen. Because of that, I was able to make out the timestamp. It was tomorrow's date. I'm sure someone just fiddled with the date, but that only made it creepier, if that's even possible. Now I had video evidence of breaking and entering, except nothing to say who did it or why. I was losing confidence in the police altogether. The last thing Ben said on the video is that he went ahead and traced that link I gave him to the hole. He was able to get a specific address. I knew the address he gave me very well, because it's the duplex apartment I grew up in. That didn't make any sense. Still, I knew if I wanted to know what was happening, that's where I'd have to go. My hometown is far too far from where I live now. I moved to go to college. It's about a 4-hour drive away. My mom moved to be close after my dad died, so I rarely have a reason to go there. I heard from Mom when they decided to abandon the duplexes. For whatever reason, they couldn't sell or rent them anymore and didn't have the budget to renovate, so the town government is just letting them rot. When I first heard the news, I didn't care. I try not to get sentimental, but preparing to see the place again, where I had so many memories, it got to me. The days of watching He-Man in my fuzzy Star Wars pajamas, the days of watching X-Files with Mom, the days of lying in bed all summer reading UFO books. Of course, I realized it'd just be empty space now, nothing in common with those memories other than a floor plan. These feelings vanished soon after I arrived. I was able to sneak in through the living room window in the back, just like I used to do when I'd get home from school and realize I forgot my keys. The moment my feet hit the linoleum floor, the music started. It was low and distorted at first, so I couldn't make out what it was. It didn't matter. Someone had to be in there, and that someone knew I was there. I waited for a sound other than the music. Nothing. I felt a little more courage, so I started walking towards the stairs. The music got louder, but no less distorted. The tune was familiar, though. I went up the stairs slowly. That's where my old room was. By the time I got to the top, I knew what I was listening to. Early in the Morning by Vanity Fair. An oldie, and it was coming from a grimy old radio propped in front of my bedroom door. That was odd, because the same song started playing again when I reached the end. What radio station plays the same song twice in a row? I switched the radio off. Doing that, I realized telegraphed my exact location. I broke out in a cold sweat for a moment, waiting for something to happen, but all I heard now was a buzzing from in the room, like a beehive. I noticed my name placard was still on the door. Other people had lived there after Mom left, I'm sure of it. Either those people chose to leave my name on a door in their home, or someone had put it back. Either way, it was weird. I opened it. I didn't, and still don't know how to react to what I saw inside. The room had been set up to look exactly like it did when I was 10. Not like it did after I left for college, or even just before. Like it did in 1999. Down to the details. The Halloween lights around the desktop, Fangoria posters on the walls, my old Mr. T pillow on the bed. Someone had to have known my room in intimate detail to have done this. It was insane. Me, my mom, and Ricky are about the only ones.
It's not working.
But there were some details that were off. At first, that was comforting. Then, the more I thought about it, they seemed intentional. Like on the Candyman poster. It said it starred Tiny Lister instead of Tony Todd. And the wall was painted with the same style of stucco, but the color was a shade or two off. Things like that. They were everywhere. That was more troubling to me than the recreation itself. It's like it was recreated in a bad dream, or it all meant something. I found where the buzzing was coming from, at any rate. It was the computer. It was running. I sat down and activated the screen. Like the rest of the room, the desktop was a faithful snapshot of 1999. Every icon just as I remembered. I couldn't find anything running out of the ordinary. It was like being transported to the past. That's when I noticed the one thing out of order with my desktop. An icon way in the corner, almost off the screen, called Milk and Honey. I never had such a file, I'm sure of that. I started moving the mouse up to it. I felt strangely afraid to open it. Before I could, the radio started blasting early in the morning again. My heart almost stopped. I looked behind me, expecting the worst. Nobody was there. I got up to switch the radio off, but it was still off. I checked the batteries and there were none. That's when I realized the music wasn't coming from the radio. I don't think it ever was. I wanted to get out of there. I felt fear before. I don't think I've ever known what dread feels like before then. Not really, but I had to find out what Milk and Honey was. It loaded a Telnet connection. I hadn't seen one of those in a while. The connection worked, because in a few seconds, an ass came out and filled the window. I waited and waited for something to happen, but nothing did. Just the mountain. I tried submitting some inputs. I even wondered if the connection died. I was going to retry, but I got a call from Detective Terrio just then.
Yes.
"Are you alone?"
Now I can run.
he asked. I thought that was strange, but I told him I believed I was, but I wasn't sure. He asked where I was. I told him. He said I needed to get out of that house slowly and calmly, get in my car and drive back to him. His voice, I knew that sound. It was controlled panic. Something was definitely wrong. I was ready to listen, but I told him I wanted to know what was going on. He said he had a gut feeling about something and decided to check back with Angelica to make sure everything was okay. Everything was not.
Go under the
He
tape.
said that girl he put me in contact with 2 weeks ago was not Angelica. They had no idea who that woman was because no one's been able to find her. The home she was in was apparently between renters. Nobody lived there at the time. All they found left behind was a script detailing what she was supposed to say when she spoke to me. I was speechless and confused.
What the?
I just readjusted my thinking to believe everything with Angelica was a lie, and now that the truth about the lie was also a lie, did that make the lie true? But it got worse. Detective Terrio said he contacted Angelica's family again and asked more questions. A lot more.
Nice.
She had every message I ever sent her printed out. Pictures of me, a map of my hometown, a doll. He said in some of the pictures I was clearly sleeping. Did I know of any such pictures? I couldn't speak. He took my silence for a no, and he was right. "There's more," he said, "but you have to get back here now, calmly." I thanked him and prepared to do just what he said. That's when I noticed more had happened on the telnet screen. There was a question up. "Are you alone?"
Yeah.
"Is that you?" I asked, but the detective had already hung up. I didn't really think it was him anyway. I just hoped. I responded in the telnet client that I believed I was alone. As soon as I did, sounds started coming from the computer speakers. It came out slow and garbled. "This message is a warning, transmitted by kilotons after 2100. Break this device, shut it all down, get out, save yourself." I had no idea what it meant, really. I only remember it because it kept repeating, so I was able to record it. Other than that, I couldn't find anything strange on the computer. I unplugged it from everything anyway, just in case. I got up, ready to calmly exit like the detective said. I would have been okay, I think, but I saw something. Something that froze me in place.
Why did he stay?
There were strands of dark hair flowing from under the bed. I just kept staring at them. Mentally, I needed to make sure I was seeing right, that it wasn't just threads. It was dark in that area after all. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I realized I wasn't just looking at hair. I'd been looking right into someone's eye for half a minute, and whoever it was had just been staring right back the whole time. I screamed and I ran, jumping several steps at a time out the front door. Sure, it wasn't my proudest moment. What matters is I lived. I don't know who that was.
Look, they're under
I
the
didn't
bed.
want to find out. Knowing I was being watched that whole time,
It's a little creepy.
it still felt like that eye was on me.
What are they gonna do?
It had pretty
Crawl
much
out
ruined
from
my
under the bed
memories
while
of that
kicking
place
your
forever.
ass?
There was just one other thing to do in town while I was there. The Egypt. I don't know if I disconnected the whole by unplugging that computer, but I still had to face the Egypt again. When I got there, the parking lot of the post office was completely empty. I parked in back, in front of the filthy old windows that used to be an internet cafe. I didn't even have to break in. The glass in the door had already been busted. I just had to reach in and unlock. My hands started tingling as soon as I reached in. I kept expecting someone or something to grab my hand. When I got in, I was shocked to see it hadn't really changed at all. Computers everywhere, a sign-up sheet on the counter, and no one there. I started hearing some low voices. As soon as I did, I looked around for a place to hide. The voices continued, distant and muffled. It took me a moment to recognize my own voice. It was the conversation I'd had with Angelica. The part where she told me about being seen in places she'd never been. It was coming from one of the computers. I got closer to it, and I could see someone was up on the screen. I knew what it was right away. The animated skeleton gifs and links to conspiracy theories and Heaven's Gate. Yeah, it was my homepage. The one that was deleted almost 2 decades ago. I never thought I'd see it again, but
It's kind
why?
of funny that people
Who
delete
put
that
it
stuff
there?
just out of like
On
embarrassment.
another computer, I saw a video of a middle-aged couple staring into the camera like they were watching me, and a little girl peeking over their shoulder. The woman said,
It chose you.
and the man was shaking his head slightly. He looked frightened. Another computer started playing a song. I recognized the sound of Vanity Fair again. Hitching a ride. That made it click. I'd just walked into a trap. I had to get out, but I couldn't. These people started coming inside. I hadn't even heard them approaching. A middle-aged woman with long black hair, well-dressed. An older businessman, it looked like. A rough-looking homeless guy. More and more people crowded in without saying anything. They were moving towards me. I tried talking to them, but their faces were blank, emotionless. They didn't seem to hear. I ran into the bathroom and closed the door behind me. It had a simple turn-the-bolt lock, so I locked it. I pulled out my phone to see if I could get the police, but there was no signal. I started hyperventilating and had to catch myself against the wall.
You can shake
That's when
those
I
doors
remembered the story about the guy knocking on the wall. Maybe there weren't bricks on the other side. I knocked for a hollow spot, and when I found one, I started kicking a hole in the drywall. I tore the rest of the hole open with my hands. There was a space back there.
You have to be
I
big
used my
enough.
phone's flashlight to look inside. The space was about 2 feet in width to the brick wall. I stepped inside. There were tons of floppy disks stashed in there. It was crazy. I heard those people breathing outside the door. They weren't trying to open it or beat it down. They were breathing heavily against it. Then I saw something moving under the door frame.
Bunch of weirdos.
I thought it was a finger sliding underneath, maybe trying to grab a shoelace or something, but it was too pink, too wet. It was a tongue. One of them was licking under the door. That scared me enough to go deeper into the space, stumbling over pieces of sheetrock, but there was nowhere to go. While I waited for something, anything to happen, I noticed 2 things. One, written above the hole I just made on the inside, the hole had been painted. The other, it wasn't sheetrock I was stumbling over. It was bones. I don't know how long I sat there. Suddenly, the breathing sound stopped. A few minutes later, Detective Theriot burst into the bathroom. The door splintered at the first thrust. Those people could have gotten to me if they wanted to. The detective said no one was out there when he arrived.
Damn.
While he escorted me out, I saw all the computers were gone. The guest book, all of it. But the bones and floppy disks were there, and very real. He said we'd have a lot to discuss. After I got away from the police station, I came home and settled down to try to relax. Anything
Left?
to rest my nerves.
I
Just as I
probably punched a
settled,
cop
I got an
in
email
jail for
notification on my
days.
phone
I
that
don't know.
said, "Please look," and provided a link. I didn't recognize the number, but since the link was to a Guelph University page, I figured it was Ben. The link brought me to the webcam that Ben found weeks ago on the Gopher server. I was regretting my decision to trust it already. Why couldn't they just leave me alone? The frames kept updating, but nothing was happening. Until, with one update, I saw the trunk of my car was opening. When the frame updated 4 seconds later, the trunk was fully opened and someone was hanging half out. I guess I was mesmerized because I just kept watching, waiting for the next frame update. Whoever it was, he was standing at my door. I went to my front door and looked out the peephole. No one was there. I looked at my phone again to check the webcam. Someone was, or it should be, standing right in front of it. Maybe
I
it was
feel like I'd
something
be
that
more
happened in the
terrified if he was
past.
gone.
I looked through the peephole again, and it was blocked. I took a moment to realize I was looking right into someone's face.
Did I
An
know I go to the
awful,
Pokemon Center?
hate-filled face. I took my phone with me to the office and locked the door.
I can't be that.
I heard my front doorknob rattling and then open. I knew I'd locked it. Whoever it was walked in purposefully right to the office, like they already knew where I was going. I didn't have much confidence in the lock. I expected the door to fly open immediately. Instead, I heard a weird, distant voice, just like when I spoke to Ricky. It was like the weather radio tuned to the wrong frequency. "Why did you leave?" it asked. I called 911. I heard the operator pick up, but I couldn't speak. The door opened and this person walked in. His face was hazy, but it was familiar. He had some kind of weapon. He forced me to get on my computer and go to the hole. He walked me through each step. I didn't have a choice. I did it. After all these years, there it was. The same bland page that seemed to do nothing, but I could feel it like fingers poking in my brain. It was like I was still in my office, but that guy was gone. So were other things. I could see things that were always there, but weren't really there. It was all the same, just a little different. I was still on the phone with 911, I realized. I tried to tell the operator that the man was gone. Nothing I said was coming out right. I kept telling the operator that I saw him. And the operator was telling me, "That's the captain. He's a jackal, and he's not happy with you." "You ever heard of Franklin?" someone asked. It was disorienting, but I knew right away I was looking at Ben. And I wasn't in my home. There was a guy standing with Ben that I didn't recognize. I asked if I was in Guelph and how I got there. He assured me I was in a motel in my hometown. He didn't trust technologically facilitated communication anymore, so he came all the way to talk to me, and he introduced his associate as Milky. He'd found him holed up in a Catholic commune in rural Ontario. They said I was in serious danger. Milky spoke then. His voice was slurred. He was aware of it because he apologized for it. He went on to tell me what happened to him. He said he'd been part of this hacking community for years. Nothing for profit, just good old-fashioned mischief. They especially liked dicking with fringe and religious groups. They started on IRC. When the World Wide Web became the thing, they migrated to a web forum. One day, a hidden link appeared on the forum. Other members tried to scrub it and insist that no one touch it. One of the guys on the forum, one of their oldest members who fled the Soviet Union back in the 70s, said he knew what it was. It was studied before, and it was never, ever supposed to be available to the public. He'd seen what Stalin could do, what murderers could do, and he wasn't scared. That was life. This thing scared him. It sounded like a put-on. Milky said this guy had a healthy sense of humor, but the guy swore it was real. He said it started way back when the first computers were being networked. The electrons and other particles that are brought together and herded about in making these connections leave empty spaces of nothing where they were. It's like an anti-net. And the more and more we connect all over the world, the more this emptiness grows. "And what's so scary about that?" someone on the forum asked, and he replied, "Just because it's empty space doesn't mean there's nothing in it." He wouldn't elaborate on that, no matter how much they tried. He'd only tell them he'd seen it for himself. Milky figured the guy didn't want to make them curious about it. That failed. He was very curious about it. More than ever. So he clicked the link. He remembered being disappointed by it, because it was just a blank page, but after clicking it, he started to notice strange things happening. He lost track of time. He'd be told by acquaintances that he'd done things he had no memory of doing, or even that he couldn't have done because he was doing something else. This one time, he heard his dogs barking. It was 3 a.m. He got up to see what was going on. The dog was standing in the entrance to his living room, just barking non-stop. He expects to find a mouse cornered in there, but he said he remembered being so startled. He tried to scream, but no sound would come out. 2 men in business suits were sitting on his couch. He immediately thought of a mob hit, but it's Canada. What mob? He turned on the light. They didn't flinch. They looked like normal businessmen. They were staring at the floor, drinking Capri Sun. He told them to get out of his house or he'd call the police. They just got up and left. On the way out, one of them said, "You asked us to come and sit here." He never saw those men again in his life. Another time, he called his brother in Vancouver to wish him a happy birthday. They had a pleasant chat, and he hung up the phone, went about his business. About an hour later, it hit him like a punch in the gut. His brother died 2 years ago. He always called him on his birthday. He just did it so reflexively that when he got an answer, it was like old times. "Who the hell was I talking to, man?" he asked. His stories sounded a lot like the ones the fake, real Angelica told me about when I talked to her weeks ago. So either I was speaking to the real Angelica then, or maybe this wasn't the real Ben and Milk. I guess I couldn't be sure about anything anymore. At least it was less scary to believe they were real. During that time, he said he kept checking the hole. He wanted to figure it out. He thought it was controlling him. He didn't remember the things he saw when he visited, but he said the old Soviet was right. It wasn't empty. When he saw in there, his brain wouldn't let him remember. I just wanted to know why all this was happening.
So it's
Ben
like,
stepped in. He said there's only one way he can think of for this sight, if it can be called that, to influence a mind that way. It has to be electromagnetic emissions. It must somehow be able to read them off of us and produce them as well. It's a technique that was experimented with as a form of freaking, but never with biological systems.
freaky?
As to why, he didn't think there was any purpose. It was just there and did what it did. It was the antinet. It introduces emptiness, division, and chaos instead of connection. That's just a byproduct of its existence, and its existence is a byproduct of the internet, like angry Facebook arguments are a byproduct of the internet. It was never supposed to be something you could just navigate to. It was theoretical, a thing a few computer scientists knew about. Somehow, someone leaked it out there. It was all over. It was buried on the Heaven's Gate website. It was buried on the Heaven's Gate website, hacking forums, occult sites. The fringe of the internet is where it moved. That was a lot to take in. I'm not sure how much of it I really believe. On top of that, apparently several hours had passed since the man made me click the hole. I suddenly remembered what the 911 operator said to me. "Who's the captain?" I asked. Milky was shaving
That's
when I
pretty
asked
good.
him. His hand stopped moving.
I'm a little
I
concerned
saw
that it's
in
the
the
same
mirror
stat,
tears
though.
forming in his
It's only
eyes.
so I guess I don't
He
care.
was visibly shaking. "Captain Meat, from the hole. It looks kind of like a dog." Then he went back to shaving like nothing happened. Later, I thanked Ben and Milky for saving me,
That might not
for
be good.
risking so much, really. Especially Ben, and for trying to warn me with the link to the webcam, but both of them denied ever sending that text. They asked to see it. They couldn't figure out where it came from.
Getting
They
a
checked
level
the link to
2
the
is
webcam
really
too.
bad for me.
It still worked. There was the front of my home, my car, with the trunk still open. We watched it
I
for a
could try to
few
go
frame
catch like a
updates
rabbit's
before
head
Ben
or a
noticed
cheerleader
someone was
top.
in the trunk. It was dark
Be a lot
and
easier to
grainy,
train that way.
but that was definitely someone in there. And I shuddered when we all agreed that whoever that person was, they were looking right at the camera, or us. We turned it off. I woke up in the middle of the night a few nights later. We decided we didn't want to keep paying for the motel, so we were crashing with my mom by then. She was happy for the company. She was obviously worried about me. She said I had to get a grip and not let my life slip away.
Just solve this thing.
She said. It was weird. It wasn't the sort of thing my mom would say. Anyway, I woke up because I was hearing whispering sounds. You'd think louder sounds would wake you up, but no, the whispers are the worst. I listened carefully, tried not to move. I wanted to hear where they were coming from. It was a two-way conversation. I couldn't make out any of the content, though, just a word here and there. I got up slowly and looked towards the corner of the room. That's where I thought the sounds were. It took a while for my eyes to adjust. When they did, I saw Milky kneeling in front of one of the electrical sockets. He'd whisper something into it, and then turn his head and wait, and whispers came back.
Why?
He saw me looking and said,
Why me?
"Some trick, huh? I guess it was ventriloquism?
Why?
But why do that alone in the middle of the night? 'Cause he was crazy?" I got out of bed and went out to the kitchen for water. I could see someone standing out on the front porch through the kitchen window, figuring Ben couldn't sleep either. I went out to ask him if Milky was really okay, because he didn't seem to be. I flicked on the outdoor light and stepped out, but it wasn't Ben out there. It was Milky again. He tried to tell me something about constellations, but I walked back in. Something wasn't making sense. There was no way he could have gotten out that fast. Some tricks, huh? I went into the living room. The TV was on. It was the episode of Seinfeld where George finds a doll that looks like his mother. That made me uncomfortable, so I changed to another channel. The program guide said the ninth gate would be showing. I always liked that one, but instead of the ninth gate, it was the 10 Commandments. Very different movies. Only one number off, though. Seeing Heston's Moses posturing with the Egyptians struck me. I never did get to speak to Holy Moses. I let myself be distracted, chased off, or both. And everything happening just seemed to be getting more and more filled with coincidences and connections that weren't adding up, or added up too well, which was the same thing, if you ask me. I started up Mom's computer. It still ran on Windows XP. It was Dad's computer, and she didn't like change. I had to download MIRC. As soon as I did, I connected to EFNet. This time I was going to talk to him. He wasn't hard to find, just a who is, and there he was, in @H1N1. He was the only one in there, besides me. Not a lot of bird flu fans, I guess.
3 damage.
Before I could send him a message, an email notification appeared on screen. I guess Mom had it on auto start.
Wasn't gonna win that
The
anyway.
notification caught my eye because it said it was from Detective Theriot. Subject, information request. I shouldn't have, but since it was from the detective, I felt it had to concern my situation. I clicked on it and read. As we discussed, here is the documentation on the dental records with the doctor's signature. The attached document was about the skeletal remains found in the Egypt. I felt a sudden wave of horror because I thought I knew what was coming. Dad's bones somehow got in there, but I was wrong. They matched the skeleton up to my dental records. Mine. I don't know who that man is, he went on, but he is not your son. That was just absurd. I knew my own mother, for Pete's sake. I thought about deleting the email, but that wouldn't do any good. Then I started piecing things together, wondering if maybe I really was dead, or maybe I was an imposter, and that's why I had memory lapses. Then I remembered I was just about to message Holy Moses.
Oh, shit.
Why did something always happen when I was about to message him? It had to be a trick. I went back to IRC and sent Holy Moses a message. Who are you? No response. I got a sudden message from U4728 Do you know where your mother is? I ignored him. I sent another message to Holy Moses. Do you know what's going on? No response. U4728 messaged me again. Are you sure she's okay? I took a chance on what I remembered from Angelica's story. I sent Holy Moses a short message.
God.
The letter M. This immediately triggered a file transmission, which I accepted. It was a video file.
We should peek
It
at their
downloaded
stats.
in about 5 minutes. If Holy Moses was as old as they claim, this video would have taken a day or two back then. The video was called freedom.mov. Milky came in from outside, stood a few feet away from me, and stared at me. That was unnerving enough. Then the pantry door started to open. Ben stepped out. He had to have been sitting cramped in there all that time. He also stood still and just stared at me. My mom came in from outdoors. Why was she outdoors and where? She joined Milky and Ben. What's going on? I asked them. They didn't speak. I felt the tension in the air and the assurance that something would happen. The suspense and stillness was getting worse than anything they could do to me. My heart was beating so fast, and I had been hearing a dripping sound for a minute or two without paying attention. Too much was going on. Now I looked to where the sound was coming from. I saw fat beetles crawling out from Milky's sleeves, over his hands, and dropping to the floor. What was going on? I think I was so afraid I couldn't feel it anymore. Slowly, I grabbed a loose USB dongle, attached it to my phone and to the computer. I'm surprised that old computer could read the phone, but it did. While they stared at me, I transferred the video file to my phone. I unplugged the dongle, took my phone and ran to the bathroom where I locked myself in. I heard feet
The only time I
shuffle
ever
up to the
freaking
door and
use
stop
the
there.
word dongle
I
is in
turned on the
Resident
shower
Evil.
to drown out sound and then started watching the video. The webcam being used was severely damaged by the looks of it, but I could make out a very sickly-looking
Memory
older
card or
man.
something.
The audio was distorted, and I had the shower running, so I had to start it over and up the volume. The man said he'd been trying to warn me.
Stop
The
blowing
dilettante distortion from the hole allows him to send messages during brief windows. If I'm listening to this, he said, I am in the hole and have been for a while. Other things are also in here.
Whose hole?
While he spoke, I kept hearing screams in the background of the recording. Some sounded closer than others. He said these things don't want me going anywhere. I need to get out before it's too late. He knows, he said, because he's me. The last thing he said before the video ended abruptly was, "The birds and the bees." I couldn't leave through the door, so I pulled up the blind to leave through the bathroom window. I almost shrieked when I saw my mother's face pressed up against the window. I was trapped. I thought about pushing through anyway, but I couldn't hit my mother. I could hit Ben or Milky if I had to, but not my mother. So I took the door. Nobody was there. That just made me worry about where they really were. I stepped outside, and still nobody there. I hurried to my car before Mom could come around from the back. Then I heard rapid footsteps. Ben was running right towards me from way down the street. "Stop hurting me!" he shouted. But he didn't look in pain. He looked in a rage. I got in my car and started backing up. When he got to me, he was pounding on the window, still screaming. I drove straight back to my home, leaving them all behind. The only explanation could be that I'm in the hole, whatever that means, because there was no other way Ben and my mom would act like that. But when did that happen? And what does that even mean anyway? Before I even stepped inside my home, I knew something was wrong.
Or maybe he went in
Waves
as a
of
kid or
something just bad,
was falling in
pure
and broke
bad,
out.
were hitting me. I opened my front door. Everything looked normal. I started turning on all the lights, and I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer. And then I saw them. 2 men in bee costumes sitting on my treadmill, looking at the floor, not moving, almost like they were stuffed, or forgot they were there. "What do you people want from me?" I said. I kept a tight grip on the knife. They stood up. Then they both looked down the hall toward my office. I followed their gaze, but saw nothing down there. After a few seconds of wondering what they saw, I heard the song start. Early in the morning, while I was looking down the hall, they were already heading out the door. I decided to follow them because whatever started that music gave me a worse feeling than them. As I stepped out the door, I'm sure I heard a dog growling behind me.
It's
I
not a
followed
dog.
them across the road and into the woods. I turned my phone flashlight on to be able to follow them.
That
It was like
a
they could
door
see
or
in the
something.
dark the way they navigated the woods. The deeper we went, the more uneasy I became. They just seemed to keep going and going. The deeper we went, the more I started to hear birds. I never even thought of it before, but I hadn't heard any birds for a long time. Weeks at least. Or locusts, or any springtime sounds. The more I followed the bees, the more I heard the birds, until they got loud enough I figured we must be under a massive collection of nests. I kept following them until it got too loud to bear, and then it sounded like machinery, like elevators. There was a machine, hidden out in the middle of nowhere. I followed them inside, and then... And then I was back in my office, sitting at my desk, slumped over my keyboard. The corner of my mouth was wet. I must have blacked out. I picked myself up. I felt like I was just waking from a deep sleep. The room was bright with sunlight. I could hear birds chirping up a frenzy outside. My screensaver was on. When I shifted my mouse just to see what time it was, there was an email from the globetrotter.net Angelica. It read,
Pretty intense, huh? You can spend the rest of your life in there.
I sat, disoriented for a while, before realizing I had to urinate, eat, and drink. When I had done those things, I looked around my home for clues. The knife I'd taken was back where it belonged. My old computer was put in its box. I called my mom to ask if she was okay. She didn't remember any of the events from the previous night. That's when I remembered the video on my phone from Holy Moses. I checked it, and it was still there. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I played it back. Here would be my evidence. The video was 2 minutes of distorted audio and video. In all the distortions, no recognizable sounds or images. That was a few weeks ago. It's taken me some time to get calibrated to reality. Nothing strange has happened since. I can't explain what happened. Maybe I had a psychotic break. I was under a lot of stress at work. Maybe someone was gaslighting the hell out of me. Maybe there really is a secret website that uses electromagnetic waves to mess with your mind. I'm just glad it's over. I'm glad to be going back to work like a regular person, making banana smoothies, not thinking about sinister internet cafes.
How is he
I
making
really do
banana
remember the
smoothies if you
Egypt
fell asleep
and
at a
the whole,
computer at work?
and it's like reality all twisted. I'll just end by saying I don't think I'll be feeling any nostalgia for the old days of the internet for a good long while. The only problem I'm having is whenever I'm trying to sleep, I keep remembering the whole nightmare and asking myself, am I still inside? But then, what difference would it make?
I mean, it was actually pretty good, pretty well written, if you really think about it. It says 2 years ago. I swear I filtered for not that long ago.
It's
Let's see. It's summer camp. Town that doesn't exist. I'm gonna find someone I don't know. Nature's Temple. House of White Noise. I feel like a couple of his actions were a little inhuman. I don't know. Some people act differently when in situations like that, I guess. But I feel like if someone is trying to lick under a door, you might attack them. I mean, you have so many advantages on them at that point. I mean, even if we're not even cutting that, there was a little earlier, like when he went to the police station, where I feel like he could have at least had tried to stay there for the night. I guess some people wouldn't take the risk of being held in a jail cell for 3 days for punching a cop, but I mean, the least you could do is ask. He didn't even ask. He was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go home to where I live alone. Maybe he's just ultra brave or just ultra stupid. I don't know.
House of White Noise by Dr. Rock. It is subjective. It's amazing how our upbringings can distort our perception of silence. They determine the volume that lulls us into a false sense of isolation. If you grew up in a big city, you'll have fallen asleep to a backdrop of distant cars.
This guy's got a sleepy voice.
Thinking it's quiet.
I'm not
You'll
too
be
sure
so
you want to fall
accustomed
asleep
to the
this, though.
ambience that you won't even notice the honks and shouts coming from the streets. or blend into the white noise of the
I'm
night.
gonna actually look at his channel, see if he only does this stuff. Yeah, it looks like he just makes videos talking. That's you've got a sleepy voice, my friend.
House of white noise isolation. If you grew up in a big city, you'll have fallen asleep to a backdrop of distant cars and pedestrians, thinking it's quiet. You'll be so accustomed to the ambience
Trains
that
are
you
always
won't
nice.
even notice the honks and shouts coming from the streets. Or blend into the white noise of the night. Likewise, if you were raised in the countryside, you will have blotted out the subtle chirps of the crickets and the howls of the wolves in the distance, drifting off amongst the insects and apparent bliss. This isolation to fall asleep.
That has always been like a weird thing for me. Is I grew up right next to a freeway and a train station, so I can fall asleep to a lot of noise. But when I go up to my dad's property and all you hear are coyotes, cats, crickets, birds, like owls and stuff, you are on edge. That terrifies me. I think I would stay up to like 3 a.m. And I mean, it made sense. I was in a pretty open house. There were no locks, like the doors. The house was falling apart. There was a hole in the floor. But I mean, it's not like anything could have gotten in and gotten me from where I was. I also had a dog, so like, even if there was anything large enough out there to give me, I feel like I would have already known. It's just the fact that you're not in a place with a lot of noise is just so off-putting.
Right? Because when we feel isolated, we can let our minds run free, able to create whatever we want within the confines of our own subconscious. It taught me that fact, and I never forgot it. In past years, I have tried to experiment with it wherever I went. I'd listen for the subtle sounds of the environment, realizing that she was right. Although, I find myself looking back and wishing
I'm gonna
I
need a
listened to
freaking
her more.
Mareep.
My
I just
childhood was
realized
one of the
if I don't
latter.
get Mareep, then this
I was raised in the
gym's
Pennsylvania
gonna be a pain.
Highlands, on a huge estate, at least a mile away from any of the families.
I'm pretty sure you
It was
can
truly
almost guarantee
isolated.
it, though. If you get
My
a Buzz
house was a huge colonial mansion
it's
with
just
2
Wooper
stories.
Mareep at that point.
It stood overlooking a bleak, mud-covered valley, with a faint view of a pine forest in the distance. Faded pillars lined the sides, converging with the unpainted wooden walls, occasionally lightened up by the off-white windowsills. It was always an intimidating sight from the outside for my younger self, even after living in it for several years. Apparently, they bought the estate in the late 1930s. My mother always used to say to me that she always regretted it. It was old and worn and chipped and rotted from the inside out. My father always promised to fix it, but never did. But there was one reason she
I
stayed:
do the same.
the silence. You couldn't possibly understand what it was like to live in that house. Normally, in the countryside,
Fish.
you'd expect there to be constant, if subtle, background noise.
Hey,
The fluttering of a moth's wings, the rustling of grass, the creak
Oh,
of the
there's
house
guts,
settling
though.
on its foundation. But there was none of that, somehow.
Okay,
It
so I have
was
someone who can't fall
absolutely
asleep,
hypnotizingly
and someone
silent.
who's guts.
Even if I
That is
described it
not
to you,
bad.
you wouldn't be able to replicate how quiet it was. You could just hear your own heartbeat at any given time. You could hear everyone else's, even if they were 3 rooms over. I can't tell you how many times I was kept up at night by the harshness of my own breathing. If someone stepped on a wayward floorboard during the night, you'd be sure my parents would be on top of them.
Waste
And
your
yet,
time.
somehow, it was natural to have the total
Wasn't that
absence of
term
any
waste,
sound.
but
I had any sort of electronic device, apart from a telephone, which was sort of a necessity. We didn't want the extra noise disturbing our peaceful lives. My parents were a quiet bunch. You know the type. The ones who keep their children locked away in their homes, without video games or mobile phones or anything to distract them from becoming their perfect little students. And like those kids that seem to be popping up more and more often, I had no friends growing up. It was only until I went off to college at
Those
17
parents
that I was able to really mingle with my
imprison
own
you.
kind. That was where I met Matthias. He was a city boy, having grown up in the Bronx in New York.
Matthias?
He was sweet, sensitive, and had a body to kill for. We were the
What?
cutest couple you'd ever seen. Still are. Long story short, I never went back to my Pennsylvania house.
This dude's got a
I talked with my
fucking
family on the
sick
phone
ass
occasionally,
name.
but never got to see them in person. Eventually I graduated and got engaged to Matthias, leaving my past behind and venturing into the city for a new life.
That's fire ass name.
At first the noise kept me up at night. My mother had been right about the effect of living in the countryside, and what it would have on me when I moved somewhere else. All the sirens and subways were too much to bear. She never wanted me to leave. My father had always been indifferent to most of my feelings. My mother was caring, nurturing. She taught me everything I know, homeschooled me with the supplies passed down from her own parents. I owed her so much. If as a way of punching the best of us. I could tell before I left that she was starting to lose herself. She was no longer the excited, wide-eyed persona I grew up with. Her conversations with me were brief and void of emotion, and she no longer lit up at my presence.
She
I think the silence,
in like the
combined
middle
with
of
her
nowhere.
husband's indifference, was slowly eating away at her. As my young, selfish self,
She needs to get
I
out
looked at my
more.
poor
Like,
mother and told myself I wouldn't end up like that.
go to like a party or something. Hang out with
Point
some
along the way,
friends.
My father
Jeez.
divorced my mother for reasons I never found out,
Sitting there.
and left with nearly everything they had one night, driving away in the family car and never looking back. I don't think she was ever quite the same after that. After Matt and I moved into the city, we would get calls now and
No.
then from my mother.
No, I don't think you would. That
She would speak to me in a soft voice
I
and
don't
tell
think
me
you
that she
would
was
be.
looking forward to my visit. I'd tell her I never said I'd visit, and in fact that I didn't want to go back.
oh
I
come
loved
on,
the bright
man.
lights and big dreams that lit up the New York nights. And she'd just chuckle and move on, saying how she missed me dearly. Went on for about 3 years.
Yeah,
During that time,
because
her
like the
calls
second you
became
hit a
less
certain
and less
age, you're like,
frequent,
damn,
and
I
during
really
each,
just
her voice became
don't
more
ever
and
see my
more
parent.
unintelligible. Her speech started to slur, and she broke into a habit of repeating herself every minute or so. Eventually, she lost the ability to piece together coherent sentences.
This dude legit
Over
said,
those 3 years, I watched a woman endure the passage of time
you're not
through
very
the
good for
telephone.
me anymore, so I'm gonna
Soon the calls decreased to once a month,
leave you.
then once every 2 months, then once every 4, and gradually, they disappeared altogether. I went through several jobs and several heartbreaks. We loved each other, and punished each other for our love. But we persisted, and soon I learned to forget my lonely upbringing and move on. Weeks ago, my mother called again. It was a chilly New York evening. Matt and I were taking a break from a big fight, and I was drying my tears in my bedroom, listening to the steady silence of the streets below. I picked up the phone as soon as it rang, silently hoping it would be her. Well,
Honey, that's you, right?
my name's Victoria, Mom. You know that, I said through the tears, struggling to maintain my chapped smile.
You don't need to. Too loud.
Her voice was interrupted by a harsh, raspy cough.
Son,
I've told you already, I don't want to go back. I love you, but I just can't. I sighed. This was the worst I'd heard her.
too loud!
A sudden yell made me jump. I heard her panting on the other end.
Stop
Mom? I wiped new, guilt-driven tears from my face. Mom, I'm not screaming, but I'm sorry. I'll speak more softly. Screaming! She shrieked, exhaling loudly, almost as if she had her mouth pressed up against the receiver. Noise! Too many! Too loud! Her breathing seemed to calm down.
Just come every year.
You okay?
You stay for a weekend for like Christmas,
She
or like
whispered
whatever
at
you
this point.
celebrate at the end of the year, New Year's. Like, does it really?
I'll stay on if you need me to. Sure.
Come on, man.
Something was wrong. Condition was worsening to the point where she could no longer speak. God. Each was cut off by an abrupt buzzing noise, like if someone had turned on the radio to a dead station. Mom? I can barely hear you! Mom! I yelled into the phone. I could hear Matthias in the other room, shifting his position on the couch to hear me. I heard a clatter from the other end. Huge noise.
Just imagine like a
Could barely make out my mom.
damn the dog whenever I hear that.
Shrieking.
She just gets up and then wind starts blowing in the room.
The noise overpowered her screams until it reached a point where my ears began to ring. Mom! Cut off abruptly. I dropped the phone and let my head fall into my cupped hands, more tears streaming down my face. All I could hear were the car horns and subway trains clattering below. The guilt of all those years I refused to travel back to that house rushed back to me, all in that one moment. I was trying so hard to make a new life for myself that I forgot to look back at the woman who gave me the one I have now. The next call I got was 5 days later.
Does that mean she
Went out to
never
find the body.
tried to call herself? Been like, hey, how are you
If ever
doing?
lost a loved one,
She was just like,
you know the sound of agony.
I'll wait.
It's a deep, guttural screech that pours every emotion you've ever felt into one incomprehensibly
I don't even know how to
painful
put it because I
expression
feel like
of
she
mourning.
lost her parent like 3 years ago, right?
It is the single most terrifying sound a human can make. I think I've ever screamed as hard as I did when I saw the body for the first time. The mailman found her body lying half outside the front door. Her throat had been slit in several places, dried blood oozing out of the wrinkled skin. Her hands covered in tiny scars, the results of years of unchecked self-harm. I never bothered to check in on her after I'd left, and now I was seeing her in this mangled state, exacted by her own hand. I couldn't help but feel like it was my hand too. Not many people attended the funeral, unsurprisingly. Nobody was there apart from some distant cousins.
That was not
During the time I'd listened to over the phone,
necessary.
I came to learn that my mother was unpredictable in her old age, and unpredictable in
30.
death too.
You need like 5, right?
When the time came to read her will, I didn't expect much. My father had taken mostly everything of value in the home, so I was completely caught off guard when they announced she'd left me the house. I didn't know how to react. To be truthful,
Sell the
I had
house.
become tired of the city life over the course of the past few months. Matt had too. And after we'd made up from our fight,
That's what they
we
call it.
agreed we should try
Matt.
to look for someplace else.
If I was
I
him,
looked
I
at
would
him.
not let anyone call
And he
me
looked at
mad.
me.
That's for sure.
All the guilt inside me wanted to forfeit. I didn't deserve this. After I left my poor mother alone to die. Oh, I realized all I wanted was silence. So I said yes. I should have listened to the guilt, like I listened to the noise on the phone, standing by as she destroyed herself.
Making jokes.
Looked to the driveway on a Tuesday of the following week. As our car crawled up the unpaved driveway, the gravel crunched harshly under us. We got out and unloaded the luggage from the trunk. It was then when I finally forced myself to look upon the old house. It was somehow even more imposing than it had been when I was a child. Vines sprawled up its walls like veins, writhing and weaving all around the structure. It was old and warped, with several rotten marks and sharp edges. Matt and I approached the door in trepidation. He let one of the suitcases drop out of his hand and pulled the door open. It was exactly as I remembered it. The pale, mildew-stained wallpaper gave way to the tall, winding staircase, old and creaking. To the right was the kitchen, to the left, the dining room, then the family room, then the living room. But for some reason, that sense of home was missing. As I pointed out the locations to my husband, I suddenly felt the urge to run up and down the stairs as I once did as a kid. Having finished with the first floor, I led him up to the second. Instinctively, I looked to the left, into my mother's old room. It looked just as ornate and strangely welcoming as it had when I was still home. Bed was neat and folded. The pale green sheets tilted slightly to the side, just as she had always left them. I peeked in curiously, expecting subconsciously to see my mother standing there, smiling, gesturing for me to hug her. Visibly disappointed when all I saw was a room that was empty. I opened my old bedroom and left the rest of the packing for the next day. That night we had the best sex we'd had in years, but, unlike Matt, I couldn't sleep afterwards. I still felt that resonating guilt for abandoning my mother in her time of need. This was her house.
Clearly wasn't
The
best
silence
section
I'd come to know and love seemed somehow even more devoid than before. This morning I was awakened by the gravel crunching and the sound of the doorbell. I rushed downstairs in my bathrobe and opened the door. Waiting there was the mailman, with a thin beige envelope in his hands. "Morning, miss," he said. I rubbed my eyes. "You're," suddenly realizing, "you're the one who found her, aren't you?" The man sighed. Yes, I am. You're her daughter, I guess?" I nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss. She was such a funny woman, you know. Every day she'd come out the door and greet me, always striking up a conversation. Always said I looked like some Hollywood star I'd never heard of." He chuckled to himself. "Seemed like such a nice old lady. Can't believe..." He stopped himself. "She was." I smiled, ignoring the sentence he had begun to say. The mailman cleared his throat. "Well, I was hoping there'd be better news than this, but unfortunately I've come to deliver you your bills for the month." He handed them over. "Since you're now the official owners of this estate, I'm afraid you'll have to take over where she left off." He handed me the envelope. Okay, fair enough." I shook his hand and closed the door, opening the form and analyzing the contents. I frowned. Something was wrong. I dashed out the door and held up the letter, waving to the mailman who was about to pull out in his car. "What's the matter?" he yelled. I walked over the coarse drive with my slippers, showing him the electricity bill. "This says we owe over $400 for the electric. There are barely any things in the house that run on electricity. This can't be right." "Sorry, miss, but I'm not an electrician. Don't shoot the messenger," he replied, shouting over the engine. I sighed and walked back inside, hearing the mailman's car trundle along
have a fridge?
the drive.
It was like
Matt was just
$100 right
waking
there.
up and was now descending the
So 1 month.
staircase.
Yeah, there you go.
"Oh, what's with the commotion, Vic?" He yawned. I showed him the bill. His eyes widened. $400? What the fuck? I know, right? There can't be anything in here that uses that much juice. It's just the phone, the lights, the fridge, that's it.
That's
Maybe
probably like
Mother had some
200.
giant Frankenstein lab built in her house or something. He joked. I punched him in the side. "Ow! Fuck! Okay, I'm sorry."
What?
We tossed the bill aside and sat down for breakfast. Next week, Matt and I settled in. We didn't talk much during the nights, even though I wanted to talk about so many things. He wanted to consider our future. but I didn't want to think about that just yet. Fights broke out, but we still always made up afterwards. I'd like to think it was me that was causing so much unnecessary tension between us, but I knew it was the empty space in my life that plagued me. I just couldn't stop thinking about her.
It's crazy that they would just be like, you know what, we have no
I
kids, let's
expected it
move
to
out.
flow through my open arms as soon as I entered the house, but it felt cold, like it was a different force entirely. Sure, there was no sound, but it seemed like there was still some tiny, persistent detail keeping me from truly being comfortable.
If you live in a city, you can't just leave.
My
and then go
13th day in the
somewhere
house,
else
that I was
without
able to
having
pinpoint
kids
what
or
was wrong.
something. Or at least some plans to go
buzzing.
in.
Can you hear it? It's faint.
Imagine
Nathaniel
going
was seated on our bed, having just
hanging out with
completed another
hundreds
unsuccessful
of
night
people
at
to hang out
Loveland.
with one person for
Lately,
years.
nothing had been working. Neither of us could really ever get there. I had my index finger in the air for emphasis. But it's there. Definitely there. It sounds like... I froze. What? It sounds like what? Thoughts raced in my head. I flashed back to the night in the apartment, getting that final call from my mother. It sounds like static. White noise. Like a radio left untuned. I stopped and got up, following the distant noise. It was coming from my mother's bedroom. Come on! A gesture for my husband to follow.
It's
He
the
reluctantly
Frankenstein
got
one.
up and strolled over to the doorway. Think about it. It would make perfect sense. She left some sort of radio or TV on before she died and never turned it off. It would explain her electric bill. I stepped into the room and listened intently.
No, like,
Shh.
fucking massive
Come
ass
from here
TV.
somewhere.
I'm sorry, but
I moved towards the bed in the corner, briefly thinking for a moment my mother was sleeping in it. Snapping out of my trance, I leaned against the backboard and listened. The buzz was coming from behind it. How do you move this? I called to Matt. Together we lifted the bed
that's
and
kind
pushed it out of the way. For a moment I felt triumphant in discovering the source of the issue. I was shattered when I saw what was behind it. The wall was boarded with a large square of plywood,
Oh,
hastily nailed with uneven accuracy. Around it was a thin coat of dry rot,
this would
which
be
was
good if it
causing
wasn't
it to slip out
poison
of its
type,
position.
'cause then it could fight psychics.
And on it were two
But it's
words.
a poison, so
written
yeah,
with black
useless. Yes.
Stay on. Call the police, Matt insisted. Are you kidding me? I stumbled back in shock. No, we have to get in there. Tears began forming in my eyes. This could tell us why she killed... Whatever she locked away in there, she meant for us to see it. Vic, look at it. He pointed at the bloody writing. Does that look like an invitation to you? I exhaled in exasperation. Nothing about this was right. But I needed to know something. Anything that would explain why she did it. We have to. I turned to face the board and tore it off. Splinters shredding through my fingertips. Fuck! Behind the hall was a hidden room, about 12 feet in diameter. The walls were clean and looked like they had just been freshly painted. Unlike the rest of the house, the white here was not intermingled with brown splotches of rot. It was like a mirror. In the center of the room was a simple wooden stool, upon which lay an old television from the 1930s. Its red wooden case was polished and neat, without so much as a scratch. On the television screen was static. Something inside me was unsettled by the noise being produced. It represented a disorder, a hole in my life that deserved to be filled. Because of this television, I couldn't experience the silence I embraced as a child. It wasn't home without it.
I think we're kind of
I
hoping for
needed to turn it off.
a ghost probably.
Vic, I don't think that's a good idea, Matt called as I moved my hands towards the switch. As I approached the set, I could see the wood casing, dust-free and almost lustrous compared to the rest of the house. The noise from the dead channel became louder and louder, shrieking perpetually. I turned to face the screen. Dotted pixels danced around the curved glass, dancing in tune with the void. Whites and blacks and greys. I wanted there to be something. I saw her face. She was there, staring at me from behind the glass barrier. My mother, face stretched in shock and apparent terror at something I couldn't see. My arms began to shake as I reached out to the switch. Behind the screen, her mouth stood agape, as if she was trying to scream out of the false silence that surrounded her. And as my eyes locked with hers, I could see, deep within, one emotion. Vic, are you okay? I turned to look at Matt, who was staring at me with a bewildered expression on his face. I looked back at the screen to find a mess of monochromatic pixels, lost between channels. There was nothing to be seen beyond. I sighed at the thought that my mind was playing tricks on me and pulled the switch. The static mess shrunk into the center, collapsing into a thin bar, and then fading into black. He lit in an instant. The silence washed over me like a thick syrup. No noise, no input from the outside world. The nothingness flowed through my eardrums and out into my body in a blissful stream. I let my hair fall back against the old wooden floor and laughed. It's finally quiet again, I grinned. God almighty, it's quiet again. I turned and smirked at my loving husband. What exactly were you afraid would happen? Matt shrugged, blushing. I don't know. You hear all these stories about... A thump echoed off the walls of the room. I lifted my head and turned to face Matt. I took one look at his fearful expression and knew it wasn't from him. Another door thump, this time coming from behind me. I swung around to see nothing but the same blank, clean wall that had been there since the house was built. What the fuck is that? Matt hissed. I don't know. It could be an animal in the walls, or... Two successive thumps rang out from the sides of the room. The two of us held our breaths in trepidation, expecting something to burst through the wallpaper at any moment. After a minute of no further noises, we exhaled simultaneously. Suddenly, the silence was no longer welcoming. After so much time living there, I never heard the place make so much as a whistle in the wind. I wanted to pull myself to my feet and get out of that room. But both Matt and I stayed firmly locked in place, frozen by fear. Turn the TV back on, Vic, Matt whispered. I processed the comment and was about to rebuke when another louder thump from above made my heart jump out through my stomach. Without warning, the room was filled with the sounds of repeated hits from behind the wall, ceiling, and floor. It was as though someone was pelting every side of us with huge, meaty rocks. The thumping increased in volume until it sounded similar to gunfire.
It's pretty big.
Every direction was flooded with the storm of kicks and punches. Both of us were paralyzed in place. Every fiber of my being was yelling at me to get up and run. But I just knelt, gazing in terror at the unnaturally clean walls that threatened to give way to whatever horrifying creatures lay behind it. And then, all at once, the source of the noise started screaming. Ever lost a loved one? You know the sound of agony. It's a deep, guttural screech that pours every emotion you've ever felt into one incomprehensibly painful expression of mourning. The single most terrifying sound a human can make. Not screams of agony. These were something far, far worse. I cannot describe the terror I experienced, knelt down on the cold, splinter-ridden floor, surrounded by the piercing, unholy noises. Matt was crying hysterically and covering his head with his shaky, sweaty hands. Above the cacophony of tormented screeching, I could faintly hear him shout, "Turn the TV on! Turn the fucking thing back on!" As the cries grew louder, penetrating my body and ringing through my ears, I mustered the strength to lift my arm. I saw the switch and pointed desperately towards it, willing my body to break itself free of its paralysis and reach it. And as the white noise culminated in a final, singular bellow, I flipped the television set on. Instantly, the walls ceased their roaring.
It's like it's
My
screenshotting.
ears were ringing as I realized the night was silent once again.
Wait.
Slowly, the steady drone of the static brought me back to my senses, and I pulled myself up to face my husband. Matt rushed to my side and gazed at the television in the center of the room, still perched on its stool.
It froze again.
Slowly, we walked towards the crack in the wall,
Did it?
and after looking back one last time, put the thought of what happened out of our heads. We're really the same after that.
Wait, I
Matt
missed.
started having night terrors, which he said he hadn't experienced since he was a kid. He claimed he didn't want to hurt me by accident. So, he moved to a separate bedroom where he's been ever since. The silence of the house was never again as comforting as it had been all those years ago. Just a little girl, isolated from the rest of the world in black.
Dark cave. Too bad.
I knew what was hiding behind it this entire time.
46 on the other one.
Though we never experienced the screaming again,
You can see the round.
I keep wishing for there to be some sound to break the silence. It's cold, penetrating, and totally unforgiving.
Especially offensive.
Thinking back to what my
It's
mother
also
used to say,
sexually offensive, but it's too bad. So
silence is subjective.
seriously.
It changes
Physically,
depending on where we live, how we live.
Offense.
Our upbringings determine the volume that lulls us into a false sense of isolation. We need to fall asleep at night, so we can let our minds roam free, able to create whatever we want within the confines of our own subconscious. To say that the screams drove her to do what she did.
Did it again, didn't it?
Now
Maybe
was
it's
the
me
silence
using the
that kept her.
mouse. Maybe I just can't use the
No,
mouse.
it's the
I didn't do
silence
that.
that, in the end, claims us all.
Maybe I just know how to use the mouse. Oh, that sucks. But okay, I'm fine with that. I can get over it. That one was not as well written, but I'll put it past the point of it just being shorter. So it kind of had to get to the point a little bit quicker. Kind of just like a box, right? Just didn't really explain exactly what it was, but maybe I just blanked out. I don't want to watch. I haven't watched any of his videos, so I'm pretty sure this.
Times the truth.
Pretty sure he'll be fine. I just know he's very common, so a lot of people do watch his videos. So if you have seen this, I guess it'll be more of a reaction from me.
There is one war story that everybody needs to hear at least once. It is the crazy story of how this small group of Russian soldiers during World War I defended Auschwitz Fortress in Poland. It is both absolutely horrific and utterly inspiring. And I guarantee you, it's nothing like any other war story you've ever heard. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please sneak in to the Like Button's house, take all their fresh eggs out of the fridge, hard boil them, and then put them back. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
don't know which buttons are
On
which.
the morning of August 3rd, 1915, during World War I, a 21-year-old Russian soldier named Vladimir Kotlinski looked out from behind the huge stone walls of Auschwitz Fortress in Poland. Out in front of him, he saw the same landscape he had been looking at for the last 6 months that he had been stationed at this fortress. It was a big, swampy forest that surrounded them on all sides. Additionally, in this swampy forest around them on all sides were dozens and dozens of trenches. Trenches are long, deep pits that soldiers will dig to both hide inside of when they're being attacked, and then also to launch their own attacks out of from behind their dirt walls. And these trenches that zigged and zagged all around Auschwitz Fortress were created by and now occupied by 7,000 German soldiers. And during World War I, the Russians were fighting the Germans. The Germans really wanted to take Auschwitz Fortress from the Russians. It was in a great strategic position with a railway passing right through it. There was also a river nearby and a main road, meaning whoever owned this fortress was greatly aided in moving critical wartime supplies and troops in a very hotly contested area. But despite the repeated attempts by these 7,000 Germans to take over Auschwitz Fortress over the past 6 months, they had all been repelled by Vladimir and the puny 900-man Russian force inside of the fortress. And so, by that morning, August 3rd, 1915, as Vladimir is looking out from the battlements over the trenches in the marsh down below, it was like both the Russians and the Germans had reached a sort of stalemate, where neither side was trying to attack the other, and neither side was leaving. They were just kind of staying put and doing nothing. In fact, over the last few weeks, there had been so little action from either side that the Russian soldiers inside the fortress got so bored, they began sneaking out the side door of the fortress to try to catch fish with their bare hands in the nearby river. But this morning, as Vladimir stood atop the wall, he noticed something strange happening in one of the trenches that was located closest to the fortress. It was still several hundred feet away, but he could see clearly down into this trench. And what he saw was there was this cluster of high-ranking German officers that were kind of huddled together, and they kept looking down at the ground at something inside of the trench that Vladimir couldn't see, and then they would look up at the sky and kind of wave their hands around, and then they'd look back down at the ground below them. Now, Vladimir had no idea what they were doing. I mean, again, he could not see what they were looking at in the trench, and when he looked up into the sky where they seemed to be looking, it just looked like a regular blue sky. But whatever they were doing, it was making Vladimir feel nervous. Vladimir was a young junior officer, which meant he was in charge of other soldiers, but because he was so new, he lacked experience and credibility, and so really wasn't considered a serious leader within the army. And so, Vladimir, as he's watching this strange behavior, was concerned that if he left now and told his superiors that he was worried about the Germans because they were looking at the sky funny and looking at the ground funny, that it would make him look like he was being paranoid and not a good leader. And so ultimately, Vladimir just looked at this cluster inside of the trench and decided, you know what, they're not shooting at us, there's no attack happening, so whatever they're doing, it can't be that big of a deal. And lately, no one's done anything, so why would that change now? And so Vladimir left the walls of Auschwitz Fortress and went down below to hang out with his friends. 3 days later, at 4 in the morning, the Russian soldiers who were up along the Auschwitz Fortress walls keeping watch that night noticed something strange out in the darkness near where the Germans were. When they looked out, they saw that the dark night air almost looked kind of blurry or wavy, kind of like if you were looking at air coming off of hot pavement on a sunny day, it would look kind of blurry. That's what the night sky looked like to them. But of course, it couldn't be because of heat and sun, because it's the morning, it's cold, it's dark outside. And so as these Russians are looking out, not sure what to make of this blurry air, they began calling up more Russians to go have a look and figure out what this was. And over the next couple of minutes, as the Russians looked out from behind the walls at this air, they realized what it was. It was this huge grayish-green cloud that was as wide as the fortress was, and the wind was blowing it in their direction. Now, the Russian soldiers had no idea what this was, and so they just kind of stood there watching it in stunned silence. And as they watched, They saw as the cloud would touch any vegetation, like leaves on trees or the high grass in the marsh, it would all turn black and shrivel up. And then the soldiers began hearing a soft thump, 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 thump out in the darkness. And it was the sound of birds dying and falling to the ground that were inside of this cloud. At this point, the Russians began to panic, and they began to run to sound the alarm to get the other soldiers up to prepare for an attack. But as they did, they began to smell this very harsh chemical smell coming into the fortress, and then before long, all the Russians could hear was the sound of their comrades coughing. It would turn out that strange behavior that Vladimir saw 3 days earlier of the German officers huddled together looking at the sky and then looking down at the ground and then back at the sky again, what they were doing was preparing for a chemical attack on Auschwitz Fortress. On the ground, out of sight of Vladimir, were canisters containing the poisonous gas, and when the officers would look up and put their hands up, they were gauging if the wind was strong enough and in the right direction to launch the attack. Now, 3 days ago, the wind had not been in their favor, but this morning at 4 a.m. on August 6, 1915, the wind had been in their favor, and they had released the gas. And this gas was quite possibly the worst gas you could ever come up against on the battlefield. It was a combination of chlorine gas and bromine gas. On their own, chlorine and bromine are very toxic and can kill you. But when you mix those two gases, it becomes exponentially more dangerous. The gas mixture binds to moisture and then turns the moisture into hydrochloric acid. Meaning, if a person who did not have a gas mask on came in contact with this poisonous gas, when they inhaled it, it would literally fill their lungs with acid, which would dissolve them from the inside out. And then also, the gas would get into their eyes and into their nose, and the acid there would burrow holes into their skull. And once you come in contact with this gas, there's nothing anybody can do to save you. You're gonna die, except it's gonna take a really, really long time. You don't just immediately dissolve. It's this long, drawn-out, excruciatingly painful process. By this point in World War I, chemical warfare was really not being used by anybody, and so as a result, the Russian army did not outfit their soldiers with gas masks. The German army did, and they knew the Russian army did not. So, as this horrific poisonous gas began permeating every square inch of Auschwitz Fortress, all of these Russian soldiers had nothing they could do to protect themselves from this gas. And so right away, soldiers began bleeding from their eyes and their mouths and their ears, and they literally began coughing up chunks of their lung. And so very quickly, the Russians inside the fortress understood they were being poisoned. And so these soldiers that were not as affected, at least not right away, by this gas, quickly began ripping off their shirts, dunking them in water, and wrapping them around their heads to try to limit how much they breathed in of this chemical. But it really didn't do much to stop the chemical. In fact, these makeshift gas masks might have made it worse because the gas would have bound to the moisture on the shirt. And so the Russians were totally doomed. They were surrounded on all sides outside the walls by their enemy, and then inside the fortress was this gas, and there was no ventilation in the fortress, and so there was nowhere to go. They couldn't escape death no matter where they went. And so Vladimir, he was one of the guys that was still on his feet inside of the fortress, and he stumbled over to this narrow window on the side of the fortress walls, and he looked out and he saw all these Germans running towards them, firing their machine guns, artillery's being fired. I mean, he knows they are moments away from the Germans reaching the fortress door, coming inside and killing every last one of them. But Vladimir's reaction to this was not being scared or being sad. Instead, he suddenly felt incredibly motivated. If they're going to come in here and kill us, then we're going to make it as hard as humanly possible first. Vladimir had a reputation for being totally fearless. Over the past 6 months that they had been under siege from the German army out in their trenches, anytime fighting broke out, Vladimir was always the first to run up and be right on the front line of fighting. And then several times when his comrades had been shot or wounded, Vladimir would run out into the line of fire to save the fallen soldiers. It was like Vladimir lacked any instinct for self-preservation. And so as the Germans continued their run towards the fortress, artillery shells are hitting the walls, there's constant gunfire, and Vladimir, he leaves his window and he marches back over to the open courtyard inside of this fortress where the 100 or so other still living Russian soldiers were. I mean, they're all gonna die. They've been totally poisoned by this gas, and it's just a matter of time now, but they're still on their feet, and Vladimir walks over to them, and even though, again, he's pretty junior, he stands up and he says to them, "This is our moment. We are all going to die. But what we do right now will define us." And the way Vladimir said it, he got those 100 soldiers who were on death's door to be so motivated so quickly that they rallied to him. And so as these men are literally bleeding out of their eyes, their mouths, they're coughing up pieces of their lung, Vladimir explained the plan. And then moments later, with Vladimir in the front, this gaggle of soon-to-die Russian soldiers charged towards the gates, opened the fortress, and began running out towards the Germans, screaming with their bayonets lowered. Now, the Germans on the outside fully expected that this chemical attack would kill all of the Russians, that taking Auschwitz Fortress would be super routine because when they walked in, everybody would be dead. And so suddenly to have the fortress open and have these men that are covered in bloody rags and they're puking up pieces of their organs and they're stumbling forward like zombies with bayonets out, screaming like banshees, it scared the living out of the Germans. In fact, they were so quickly terrified by what they saw, they literally dropped their guns, turned, and began running back towards their trenches. And as they did, Vladimir and his dead man army began picking off the Germans one by one. And then after Vladimir and the dead man army ran out of ammunition, they just continued staggering forward directly into the thousands of Germans in front of them and began picking up dead German weapons and firing them. And then when they got up to the trenches, where these retreating Germans had been so scared they had run into their own barbed wire, and so there's all these retreating Germans stuck on the barbed wire, the Russians just began bayoneting all these men that were stuck. And so at some point, as Vladimir is doing this, a German soldier ran up to him and bayoneted Vladimir right in the stomach. He ran him all the way through until the barrel of the gun was right up against his stomach. And Vladimir apparently looked down at this bayonet, knew he had been completely run through, and he looked up at the German who had just stabbed him, who was still holding the gun, and Vladimir spit blood and lung tissue all over this German's face, and then just began screaming directly at this guy. And so the German was so scared, he just dropped the gun, turned, tried to run, and then Vladimir was back on his gun with the bayonet still in his stomach, shooting at the Germans. The Germans were so completely caught off guard and terrified by Vladimir's dead man army counterattack that even though they outnumbered the Russians 70-1, they failed to take Auschwitz Fortress. The main reason for that was the Germans who had escaped the counterattack and made it back to their trenches, they told the other German soldiers that the Russians had turned into zombies, literally, that they were undead, and so attacking them was pointless. They're already dead. And the Germans were so scared, they refused to leave their trenches again. Once the Russians could tell they had successfully forced a retreat by the German army, Vladimir, who was still alive at this point with a gun still stuck in his gut from the bayonet, he called out to the rest of his soldiers to retreat back to the fortress. And so this handful of Russian soldiers who were about to die, they hobbled their way back inside of their fortress, and then Vladimir gave his final command: destroy the fortress. If we can't have it, nobody can. Every single Russian soldier that came in contact with that poisonous gas died, including Vladimir. When the Germans did eventually take Auschwitz Fortress at a later date, when again, all of the Russians were dead, when the Germans went inside, they realized the fortress had been destroyed and it was no longer strategically valuable. Vladimir would be awarded posthumously Russia's highest military honor. His actions and the actions of the other dying soldiers that fought alongside him are remembered today in stories, songs, and statues all across Russia. 250,000.
That right there. That right there is a, I don't want to say a man, just
Times the truth is stranger than.
fucking crazy motherfucker. Like, he's bad to the core. Holy shit. Just, like, imagine. I'm just thinking, like, for him, his choice made sense, but the Germans didn't. Although I'm pretty sure these titles are really weird. The Bell Witch Haunting. Cocaine Bear thing.
Haven't heard about what happened at the Gay Pride Parade in the Netherlands, it's likely because you haven't seen the infamous security footage that's currently going viral on Reddit and other places on the internet. Today, I'm going to show you portions of that security footage and tell you the story about what's really happening so you have context and can really appreciate what you're seeing. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please swap out all of the Pop-Tarts in the Like Buttons pantry for the unfrosted kind. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Pretty catchy intro. What the fuck?
On September 27, 2018, in a little city in the Netherlands, a security camera captured 6 men walking calmly toward this brick bungalow inside one of the country's holiday parks. A holiday park is a place that offers cheap accommodations to tourists. They typically have things like campsites, RV parking, cheap bungalows for rent, and they also often offer things like swimming and golfing and bowling, so it's kind of like an all-in-one for families on vacation. But on this September day, these 6 men caught on camera were neither family nor on vacation. Instead, as they walked, it was very clear from their body language that the only thing they were interested in was getting inside of their holiday bungalow. Once they did reach the front door of this bungalow, the apparent leader of the group, who had dark brown hair and a full beard, he pulled out a key, unlocked the door, he opened it up, and then he made sure the rest of the men took off their shoes before walking inside. And then once all the men were inside the door, the leader shut the door and locked it behind them, and then barefoot they walked through the hallway into this corner living room in the back of the bungalow. And in this room there was this L-shaped couch that was centered on a coffee table and a couple of chairs scattered throughout the rest of the room. And so the 6 men kind of took up seats in these different places, and then after they were all sitting down, 2 of the men who had been seen walking into the bungalow carrying backpacks and duffel bags, they pulled those bags out and set them on the coffee table. And as soon as these 2 men did that, the other 4 men who had been chatting amongst themselves went completely silent and turned and just faced the bags on the table. It was very clear that whatever was in the bags was very significant. So significant, in fact, that the group had pulled most of the curtains across all of the windows inside of this bungalow to make sure no one outside could look in and potentially see the contents of these bags. And once the 2 men unzipped the duffel bags and backpack and began putting the contents of the bags onto the table, it became incredibly clear why the men were so on edge. Inside of these bags were guns. And in the Netherlands, no private citizen is allowed to possess them. Over the next hour, the 2 men who had actually carried the guns into the bungalow, they began going over some instruction with the other 4 men of how to use these slick black pistols and AK-47 rifles. They taught them how to load the guns and reload and how to aim, and they did a number of dry firing exercises, which is basically pulling the trigger on any real gun when the gun is not loaded. And so these 4 students paid careful attention to their 2 instructors, and at some point they became more confident, and you could just see the excitement was building in the room. At one point, one of the students grabbed 2 of the AK-47 rifles and held one in each arm and pretended to fire them simultaneously, like you would see in the Rambo movies. But when one of the 2 instructors reached back into one of these bags and pulled out a new item, a vest, and laid it on the coffee table, immediately the mood in the room shifted again. Now the students seemed more nervous than excited. One of the 4 students eventually walked forward and somewhat reluctantly extended his arm to allow the instructor to slip the vest onto him. And then once the vest was put on the student, you can see in the camera footage there are pockets all over this vest with little wires poking out of them. This vest was a suicide vest, and the pockets contained explosives. As one of the instructors showed the student in the vest which cord to pull in order to detonate himself, you can hear in the background someone saying, "When the police come, you can take them with you." A little over 2 hours later, these 6 men were done, and they began packing up their arsenal of new weapons back into the bags, and then they stood up to leave. But when they left, it was the students who had the bags of weapons, not the 2 instructors. Once the 6 men had left the bungalow and were back outside again, they put their shoes back on, they locked the bungalow behind them, and then the 2 instructors were seen on camera walking away from the bungalow to a separate car. They drove off, and then the 4 men that now had the weapons, they walked to a nearby white cargo van, which contained 1 other man who had not been inside of the bungalow with them, but he was very much a part of this group. He was their driver. And so as the 4 men with guns approached the white van, the driver saw them, he climbed out, he ran around to the back and opened up the back doors that led into the windowless back cargo area of the van. And the 4 men with guns, they climbed inside. The driver shut the van, climbed back into the driver's seat, and then before long, the driver was leaving the parking lot and heading north towards the city of Amsterdam, which is the capital of the Netherlands. Every year, Amsterdam plays host to one of the largest gay pride parades and events in the world. The location is significant to the LGBTQ community because it was here in 2001 that the first gay marriage bill was signed into law, making the Netherlands the first country in the world to legalize gay marriage. So, for 1 week a year, hundreds of thousands of people pour out onto the streets and line the canals of Amsterdam, all drawn together to affirm their rights and to celebrate their sexual expression, preference, and identity. And the men in the white windowless van intended to use their new weapons and training to kill or maim as many parade goers as possible. They were hopeful that their terrorist attack would rival or even eclipse the attack from 2015 in Paris in a nightclub that killed or injured more than 500 people and sent shockwaves through Europe. 30 minutes later, the 4 men in the back of this windowless van felt the van slow down and pull off the main road and not come to a complete stop, but just kind of begin to slow roll, which was odd because they had no reason to slow down and they were at least 30 minutes away from their destination. And so instinctively, the men reach down and make sure their guns are safely stowed inside of their bags and out of sight in case somebody opens the back door. They don't want people to know they have guns. They are illegal. And so as the van continued to go painfully slowly for really no reason that was clear, the men in the back of the van were really starting to worry that something was wrong. Now remember, they have no windows. They can't look outside. They don't know what's going on. However, there was a small crack in the partition that separated the back of the van from the front of the van where the driver was. And so the men in the back of the van began craning their necks and looking through this little crack to try to see if they could understand what was in front of the van and why the driver had stopped. And when these men looked through that little crack and they saw what was out there, they immediately began to panic. They began reaching down and fumbling for their bags, trying to open them up to get their guns, and then by the time they're kind of getting the guns into their hands, all the doors on the van fly open, and the men in the back just begin firing their guns blindly at the open doors. But when they pull their triggers, nothing happens, because their guns were fake. They had been sold to them by the people who were flinging open their doors, the police in tactical gear with their dogs, and they knew these guys had fake guns. they knew their suicide vests were fake. They were full of fake explosives. They have nothing lethal inside of this van. And so the police, they just fling the doors open and send in the dogs. And so the dogs, they jump into this van, and these wannabe terrorists are screaming, and they're firing their fake guns at the dogs as the dogs are shredding these terrorists to bits. And then whenever they tried to jump out, the police would just pistol whip the terrorists, until finally all of these wannabe terrorists were in the fetal position crying, or they were crouched down with their hands over their head. It would turn out the two instructors who had brought the duffel bags of guns into the bungalow with the other men, they were not other fellow terrorists. They were undercover police officers who were a part of the special national anti-terrorism team who were able to infiltrate this terrorist cell. These undercover cops were the ones who sold the fake guns and fake explosives to the terrorists, and they were the ones who set up this meeting at the bungalow, which allowed them to place cameras and listening devices all over the place. Plus, they were also able to bug the white van because they knew they would be departing the bungalow inside of it. So, all the wannabe terrorists that you saw on camera, plus two others that were not seen on camera but were totally involved, were all sentenced on October 8th, 2020 to anywhere from 10 to 17 years in prison. Meanwhile, the Amsterdam Pride Parade went off without a hitch. That's going to do it. If you got something out of this episode and you haven't done this already, please replace all of the Pop-Tarts in the... But if there is one...
That is fucking hilarious. Those motherfuckers. Just like imagine like imagine actually going through that. Being like, yeah, I instigated this this terrorist group, and I gave them fake guns, and then I arrested them by sending dogs into their fucking camp. It's beautiful, you know. It's just, oh no no no! Playing with fire. I think that's just hilarious. Oh, okay. Thinking. No. What's the matter, girl? What? See if I stream tomorrow. I'll try to put like one of those stream starting things up. Yeah, this works fine. I'll make a playlist of videos. Actually, that makes more sense if I make a playlist.